Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Morning, 9:30 on Thursday, the 25th of January. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Very good morning. Thank you for joining us. So, tackling zombie knives. Today we'll see the government's third attempt since 2016 to ban so-called zombie knives. The new rules being introduced to Parliament won't take effect until September, but would see these specific knives and machetes being banned. Home Secretary James Cleverly had this to say.
When I became Home Secretary, I made the immediate decision to go further, to put forward this secondary legislation to support what we've already done, to make the possession of zombie knives illegal and to close the loophole. So I'm very pleased we're taking action now and will be determined.
Meanwhile, the Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer is launching a new youth programme. He's calling it Young Futures to tackle knife crime. Our political correspondent Olivia Utley, she has more.
Yes, at long last, the Prime Minister is pushing ahead with its plan to cut down on knife crime, but the Labour Party says it's not enough. So what will Keir Starmer do differently? Find out more with me very soon.
And signed, sealed, but not delivered. The new Royal Mail proposals could see postal deliveries cut from 6 to 5 days a week, or even as low as 3, in an attempt to modernise the service. Would you feel let down by that?
Modernising it, they're massacring it. No to army draft. Downing Street has shot down the head of the army, who said the UK must be ready to train and equip ordinary people for future military conflict.
And child obesity crisis. Tens of thousands more children are growing up extremely overweight after the pandemic, with researchers warning that this could cost us £8.7 billion in the future. Who does the responsibility for this lie with?
It's interesting that Labour and the government are going head-to-head on knife crime, but I heard the Labour spokesman on one of their programmes here on GB News earlier did not mention stop and search, Bev.
Yeah, well, it's a very controversial topic, that, isn't it? Let us know your thoughts on all of our talking points this morning. We've also had 24 hours to digest this news that we might be called up to go and fight for this country. The government have come out and said, no, calm down, we're not going to enact conscription. We're going to be talking about that as well. Let us know your thoughts, gbviews@gbnews.com. Here, though, with the very latest news, Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you and good morning. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The government's defending its record on tackling knife crime amid a third crackdown in just 8 years. The Home Secretary says the new restrictions are aimed at closing what he called a loophole that allowed some types of zombie-style knives to be sold. The fresh legislation will strengthen the definition of the dangerous knives and make it illegal to possess, sell, manufacture or transport them. James Cleverly says reducing knife crime is his priority.
I became Home Secretary. I made the immediate decision to go further, to put forward this secondary legislation to support what we've already done, to make the possession of zombie knives illegal and to close the loophole. So I'm very pleased we're taking action now. We have seen a reduction in crime. We have a plan to drive it down further. That plan is working. We're determined to take these knives off the streets.
A 17-ton consignment of family-sized tents will be flown into Gaza today as part of an agreement between Britain and Qatar. It's after the Foreign Secretary's trip to Jerusalem yesterday, where he called on the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to consider a two-state solution with the Palestinians. Mr Netanyahu recently rejected that proposal, saying it would endanger the state of Israel. Lord Cameron warned of unimaginable suffering in Gaza and called on Israel to open up more crossing points into the area. And the Ghanaian equivalent of the crown jewels will be sent back to the West African nation as part of a loan from both the Victoria and Albert Museum and the British Museum. The 32 precious items were taken during wars in the 19th century. They include a sword of state, gold badges worn by officials of the king, and a gold peace pipe. The museums are prevented by law from returning the items permanently, but V&A Director Tristram Hunt says there is a responsibility to share objects with their countries of origin wherever possible. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now back to Andrew and Bev.
Very good morning. Busy morning so far today, and we've got a very busy show between now and midday.
Yeah, well, yesterday we asked you if you think we need a civilian army to compensate for our shrinking military. This was on the back of General Sir Patrick Sanders, the head of the army, making that speech saying, yeah, we haven't got enough soldiers.
That's right. Well, the Prime Minister was clearly listening because it did cause an uproar yesterday. He's been forced to quickly, officially rule out an army draft.
And many of you took to social media to express your feelings on conscription. So, because we did a poll on it yesterday, it goes 62% again. Let's have a look. Charlotte says, my face at the suggestion the people of the UK should prepare for conscription for a government who tries to remove our civil liberties at every opportunity, sexualise our children, blimey, here we go, indoctrinate our youth, imports and houses young men from faraway lands daily, and on we go, injections for a damn cold, and instructs us to put us up. Not a fan. I
didn't pick that tweet, just to be clear. That was nothing to do with me.
She did.
I did not. And here we go. All this talk about conscription, says Isia, was it Isla? All this talk about conscription has reminded me how much I've always loved cooking and cleaning. And here's another one. Previously Handsome says, starting work on my conscription physique. And then, because he's a picture of, what's his name? Bart Simpson. Thank you, Sam Lister. That's why we get the Political Espresso for that kind of insight.
She knows her stuff, you know.
And another one here saying, in light of the UK conscription threat, Michelle Mone has a £100 million contract for body armour. Michelle
Mone, Baroness Mone,
but do you know what? This is what's so brilliant, isn't it, about the British public? Because you're faced with a situation like that, all the humour came out yesterday. There were all sorts of examples, particularly of the younger generation, saying how there will be TikTok videos done from the front line and they'll be putting down their avocados to pick up their guns, and but it did raise this serious point to some extent that we just don't have that connection anymore, the gap between that sort of narrow band of elites who expect to send out the civilians to be murdered or to murder on their behalf. People wouldn't buy it now.
I still think there'd be more support for it if it was a direct threat to the British Isles. If we saw an enemy across the Channel about to invade, I think people would be conscripted in their droves, in the hundreds of thousands. But a faraway war in Russia to do with Ukraine, I don't think it would happen.
No.
Now, dangerous zombie-style knives and machetes, how many times have we heard this, are going to be banned as the government cracks down on knife crime?
So anyone with one of these weapons can voluntarily hand it into a knife surrender bin under the official surrender scheme, which will be launching this summer.
Olivia Rutley is our political correspondent in Westminster. Olivia, we've heard this before, forgive me. I think this is the 4th or 5th time since 2016. Are they really going to do it this time?
Well, it is the 5th time since 2016 that we've heard this. It sounds as though Rishi Sunak is now properly cracking down, although the ban wouldn't actually be introduced until September. Keir Starmer is critical of Rishi Sunak's plan. He says that it isn't enough to tackle the scourge of knife crime. He had a meeting with Idris Elba, the actor, earlier this week on Wednesday after PMQs. Idris Elba has been very vocal about his plans his idea to cut out knife crime in the UK. What Keir Starmer is planning to do is set up a sort of Sure Start style programme, he's calling it, whereby people who are found to be in possession of a knife or to have committed a knife crime would be referred to a programme which would involve tagging and curfews, etc. It has been pointed out, though, that there doesn't seem to be any new funding for this plan from Starmer. He says that he would want to draw on the £100 million a year that he's already committed to for sort of other schemes, including youth workers, referring knife crime perpetrators to youth workers, etc. And he also thinks that there could be some money to be saved by cutting down on duplication and getting the charity sector involved. Well, that's something that we have heard from Keir Starmer a lot over recent weeks. I think over the next few days what we can expect is attacks from the Conservatives saying that Keir Starmer's plan to end knife crime just isn't fully funded.
All right, that's Olivia Rutley, who's our political correspondent. In the studio with us is Sam Lister, who's the political head of the Daily Express, and the Tory MP for Shipley, great friend of this programme, Philip David. Philip, to you, why is it taking so long?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, this is it's a difficult issue, isn't it, knife crime? Because you can ban knives, you can ban a particular type of knife and you can ban a particular type of machete, but that doesn't actually tackle the root cause of the problem, and and which is a much harder to tackle issue. I mean, this thing from Keir Starmer's a load of old nonsense. We've seen Labour's attempts to tackle knife crime. It's called Sadiq Khan in London.
Yeah.
It's been a complete and utter disaster. He doesn't even believe in stop and search. So there's no point banning knives if you're not even going to stop and search anybody for these knives. It's just a complete
40% rise in knife crime on Sadiq Khan's
But I think we've got to tackle why young people want to join gangs.
Yeah.
That's a big issue, and lots of really good kids end up by accident in gangs for all sorts of reasons. We've got to do that. We've got to tackle the root causes, some of the family breakdown and things like that have all contributed to the
absence of a father figure in the home is a big factor, isn't it, Philip?
Of course it is. There's definitely a correlation there. That's not to say that everybody who's brought up by a single mother commits knife crime, but there's definitely a correlation, and we need to find role models and things like positive role models for people in communities. There's loads of things. There's loads of charities that do good work. A former school friend of mine, Gavin Sinclair, Constance, runs a charity called Leap that does lots of work trying to get young people out of gangs and things like that. It's really complicated, but just saying we're going to ban knives isn't actually solving the problem. I'm sure these knives should be banned, by the way. I'm not saying they shouldn't be, but that doesn't actually solve the problem.
I was kind of impressed with the optimism baked into the idea of a surrender bin.
Yeah.
Sam, that you can, if you're at home now with a zombie knife or a machete, what's stopping you giving it away is that you don't know where to put it. You're going to go to the surrender bin. I mean, that's a bit ridiculous.
Yeah, I think you're right. That is just quite optimistic. And I think that this is the problem, isn't it? That the government has tried to legislate so many times for this, but there are loopholes. The reason there are loopholes is because this is an incredibly difficult thing to do. Knives, people need knives for very legitimate purposes, so how do you actually go about imposing a ban? I think it's interesting, though, obviously the government are trying to sort this out. It's interesting that it comes on the back of Idris Elba getting involved in this. He's obviously been very vocal in recent weeks, and I think that probably actually does help shine a bit of a spotlight on the issue. But whether actually you can really ever outlaw these zombie knives, these kind of...
You can't really.
Knives.
You can't, like you said, Philip, you can't get rid of knives.
No.
They are always going to be part of our life. You have to tackle what's happening with these kids. I think a big part of it, as you said, it's the teenagers. There is nothing for them to do.
Yeah, but what about, because Labour's saying we've got to bring back the youth clubs, we've got to bring back community hubs, which have disappeared partly open since COVID, but also, they say, because of spending cuts. Are they right?
Yeah, there's something in that. I mean, I've always been a bit sceptical about this. Kids have got nothing to do. I think kids have never had more to do. To people. When I was a kid, well, there really was nothing to do. But we used to make our own entertainment. We'd go out and play football. We'd go and play cricket with our friends or whatever. I think there's what there is, and it's understandable. I think there's a more aversion for parents to allow their kids out, going out playing in the street and whatever. I think parents are much more understandably nervous about that. So there's
no sports facilities, Phil. Like when we were growing up, you would have had the local basketball court that was unlocked. Now everything's locked. You could go and do something. They just aren't there. They haven't been funded. They've just been let go to ruin. And unfortunately, like Andrew says, I think as well, since the pandemic, a lot of those services rely on volunteers, the scout clubs, the Girl Guides, whatever they are now, and those are elderly, often volunteers. Didn't do it for 2 years and they never went back. And so those services have just fallen away, Sam, and I think the government that can get on board with getting the community back, and it is going to take money. Do you think have they allocated funds for this, Labour, or is it just something that sounds good? Because Emily Thornberry was talking about it on GB News last night.
I mean, I think, let's be realistic, there's a report out today from the Institute for Fiscal Studies that basically says there is going to be no money after the election. It doesn't matter who comes in. There is no money. It is a case of higher taxes or lower spending or probably both. So I think youth clubs and sports facilities are going to be very...
And aren't they saying too, because we know the Tory government is going to cut the taxes in the budget because there's an election coming up, and the IFF is saying effectively the tax cuts will have to be reversed after the election. Whoever wins it.
Should we have a look at what Emily Thornberry said? She was talking about this on GB News last night with Martin Daubney. Thank you. Here she is.
But we need to make sure that we do more and we work harder. And the things that Sadiq has done, he's been pushing in the right direction, but he needs a national government to work with as well. And what we would do if we were in the national government was that we would make sure that we had all kinds of things in place in order to make sure that we push youngsters in another direction and away from crime. So we would make sure that we had mental health workers in every single secondary school and part-time mental health workers in primary schools. We would have hubs around the country, 156 of them, that would be paid for, where we would bring everyone whose job it is to keep kids out of the criminal justice system together in order to ensure that they work together, they identify the people who are likely to be at risk and make sure that they are pushed in another direction instead.
It's sensible, but
it's hard to argue with that.
But 156 hubs, that's not many, is it?
No, look, I mean, this is just... I mean, it always annoys me when people like Emily Thornberry talk about mental health problems of young kids, and she was the one voting for kids to be locked out of schools and locked down during COVID.
Didn't pass me by that, Philip.
I'm going to take what she says about mental health of kids with a pinch of salt, to be perfectly honest. Look, there's no easy solutions with this. Lots of people might say, well, do you want other things to do? What about national service? That's a very popular concept for which follows on slightly.
Which is a wonderful segue to our next topic.
Your conscription issue, but I think there are things that are people prepared to bite that bullet and say, well, look, let's kids.
Would you?
I actually spent 3 years in the Army Cadets and hated every minute of it when I was at school, so I'd be probably loath because I know how much I hated it. But people might say it did me some good, and so I think there might be something in it. But I think certainly people who are either unemployed or young kids who get themselves into trouble, I think we should think about
teach them how to behave with a knife and a gun.
I think
bit of discipline.
I think
behave properly is what I mean.
I think discipline is is definitely...
And actually getting
It'd be probably with your readers, wouldn't it?
National service. Absolutely. They'd be very, very behind this. I'm absolutely positive about that. I think the problem is, though, I think children today, I think it would be very difficult to impose that policy. I just think the mindset of the parents and the children would not really allow that to happen, even though our readers would definitely back it.
If it was some sort of structured kind of gap year programme, whether it's you're leaving school at 16 or you're leaving school at 18, I think there'd be a lot of parents on board with that now.
You think?
Yeah, I really do.
Didn't Cameron launch something like that? Didn't he launch something like that?
Oh, the citizenship... national citizenship.
But does anyone do it?
Yeah, lots of people do it, but it's not really like national service, to be perfectly honest. It's
a bit more like a Duke of Edinburgh Awards scheme.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Do you think it kind of... This whole issue of national service, well, conscription more, Sam, it leapt onto the front pages today, but after this statement by Lord Sanders yesterday, Lord Sanders yesterday. And obviously the government very quickly backtracked today. It made an impact, didn't it?
I was at the briefing yesterday. So after PMQs, we have a briefing with Number 10. And obviously this issue was one of the key issues we discussed. And I cannot tell you how quickly Number 10 moved to slap this down. They were very, very clear, very, very quickly that this is not something they are going to...
Do you think the General Sir Patrick Sanders was actually making this speech to embarrass the government about the depleted state of our armed forces?
It feels like it. And I think there's a lot of frustration among the top brass about the size. That's clear. And they do keep making these pointed interventions, and I think they are trying to make that point. But I think if you listen to Grant Shapps, the Defence Secretary, his answer to that is actually it's not just all about numbers now, it's about technology. You know, obviously drones now play an important part of warfare. You don't need the same number of people to operate a drone as you might have to use other means to have achieved the same aim 10 years ago, for example. So I think they very much see that technology is part of the solution here, and it isn't all about numbers.
What do you think, Philip? Because I always thought Tories tough on defence, big issue, big strong issue for the Tories. But I mean, the army is withering on the vine.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of this conscription thing's a load of old nonsense. That's never going to happen in a million years. No, I mean, we do need to improve our defence. The world's getting a more dangerous place, to be perfectly honest, and unpredictable. And you know, the first duty of any government is defence of the realm. And I think as Conservatives, we take that very seriously. It's difficult politically because you don't get any instant, you know, sort of credit for improving defence like you do in spending more money on schools or hospitals or police or whatever. So it's politically, it's becoming increasingly difficult. But it is really important. The only caveat I would say is that the Ministry of Defence wastes money on an industrial scale, to be honest, with its procurement.
Been going on for
Tens of thousands of people wasting money on procurement. And I think if you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer, it wouldn't be unreasonable to say to the Ministry of Defence, look, I'll tell you what, we're sympathetic to more funding for defence, but please spend what you've got currently a bit more sensibly and don't waste so much before we think about increasing your budget.
This has been a problem since the Thatcher government.
Yes.
Remember she brought in somebody called Lord Levine, Peter Levine, or Heseltine brought him in, who was Defence Secretary, to sort out procurement, and here we are, 30 years later, it's still a dog's breakfast.
It is, and they employ tens of thousands of people to do that. Lord knows what they all do on a daily basis. I've always said they should bring in a few Asda and Tesco buyers into the process. They'd probably do it a hell of a lot better than the Ministry.
Very sensible.
Front page of your paper, Sam, the Daily Express, is you will deliver, the Prime Minister vows, no Royal Mail cutbacks. What happened with this story yesterday?
Yeah, so obviously over the last week or so, there's been this suggestion that Royal Mail are going to reduce their services. So you perhaps only have a 5-day or 3-day even service. And that would mean the end of Saturday deliveries. Or the alternative is that you could slow down the delivery. So instead of having a next day delivery, first class delivery, you'd actually get a kind of 3-day...
well, I think that's what we get now, don't we?
Well, it feels like it, doesn't it?
If I post a letter, it very rarely gets there the next day.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody really relies on the post in the way they used to do. But obviously, it's a big issue. The Prime Minister was asked about it at Prime Minister's Questions. And he said he absolutely is full square behind a 6-day delivery. He will not allow this to happen. The issue is, obviously, we have an election coming up. If there is a change of government, Sir Keir Starmer has not ruled out scrapping 6-day delivery.
Yeah, he wouldn't even defend a Saturday service.
No.
He sat on the fence as usual.
Is
he going to sit on the fence on everything?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it very much depends what happens at the election as to whether the 6-day service survives.
What do you think? I mean, I'm old-fashioned. I like the Royal Mail and I want to have 6-day service. I like sending letters, and I've always got stamps in my wallet, and I think it's important. I think it's an important community service.
I think this is the Royal Mail trashing their own brand, to be perfectly honest. I mean, what on earth is the point of them if they're not going to, if you can't rely on posting letters, and the cost of a stamp now is astronomical. It's not as if people aren't paying through the nose for
£1.25.
I get the fact that fewer people are sending letters now as more people do emails and all. I get all that. But it seems to me that this is just managed decline. It's like a sort of a Gerald Ratner moment for the Royal Mail. It's basically trashing its own brand, which will make the whole thing pointless. It's an excuse for poor management. You know, they need to manage their business better.
And they're being accused because, of course, this is Ofcom advice, and that will surprise some people because normally you think, well, Ofcom regulates the TV. Who knew? It also regulates the Royal Mail. And there was a spokesperson for the over 60s group, the Silver Voices, who said, I think Ofcom's response is pathetic. They're being a really weak regulator. They're rolling over to what Royal Mail wants as opposed to maybe defending the public. What do you make of that, Phil?
Yeah, well, I'm not the greatest fan of Ofcom. It has to be said, Bev. So you're certainly not going to hear me defending Ofcom on any basis. But no, I agree. The Ofcom should be there. They're not there to look after the interests of the company.
Yeah.
The whole point of the regulator is to look after the interests of the consumer.
You would think.
And it seems quite extraordinary that Ofcom would take the approach it has.
A lot of the papers, Sam, quickly is saying the Prime Minister's got 6 weeks to turn it round, 2 by-elections coming up, a budget. How much trouble is he in? Because it went off like a damp squib, the attack by Sir What's-his-face?
Sir Simon Clarke.
Sir Simon Clarke yesterday.
Yeah.
As you and I know, if you're going to make that sort of attack in a newspaper article saying you've got to resign, Prime Minister, you need to have some people backing you. He had no one.
It went badly wrong, and Philip will be able to tell you, the Tory WhatsApp group, I cannot tell you how... I've seen some of those messages and they were pretty brutal.
Contemptuous.
He didn't have anybody rowing in behind him. The only person who is on his side is Andrea Jenkins. And I think if you're going to make this kind of intervention, you need to have a gang around you ready to go out alongside you. If you go out on your own and then nobody rows in behind you, you know, it's over, isn't it?
Yeah. It really did go off badly, didn't it, for him?
Yeah, it's a complete load of nonsense. Look, we've tried a circular firing squad as a political tactic in the Conservative Party. Now, I think we should all accept it doesn't work, and let's turn our fire on the Labour Party and the disaster that they would be for the country, and that's incumbent on all Conservative MPs to do that. You know, this is all a load of old nonsense. Rishi Sunak will be the Conservative leader at the general election.
I agree.
If anyone thinks differently, I'm very happy to wager with them and take the money off them. That is just the fact of the matter. So let's just accept that as a fact, get on with actually pointing out what a disaster sleepwalking into a Labour government would be. And Keir Starmer's hoping to become Prime Minister by saying nothing, doing nothing and hoping nobody notices.
Yeah.
Well, it's working quite well.
Well, it is, because we're fighting ourselves rather than actually pointing out what a disaster a Labour government would be.
Yeah.
Right, thank you both. Sam Lister, Philip Davis, good to see you as always. Do you see your wife much these days, Philip? Estimate of she's very busy.
I don't see her as much as I'd like to, but she probably sees me more than she'd like.
She's sorting out the war on common sense. She's doing very glad she's
don't
doing
go anywhere
that.
this morning. We have a huge amount still to come. We're going to be talking to Reform UK's Richard Tice in this studio. He's under fire about his trip to Ukraine. Don't go anywhere.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good morning. It's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. A lot of cloud across the UK today with outbreaks of rain in many places, but it will also be mild. We've got our weather coming in from the southwest. Those southwesterly winds are pushing cloudy and damp conditions across the country. Yeah, there'll be a bit of snow over the tops of the Scottish mountains, but generally this is wet weather that's moving in. A chilly but bright start in the far northeast before the rain moves in during the afternoon. And the rain will be on and off in many places, most damp in the west, driest towards the southeast, mild everywhere, 12 or 13 Celsius. Now, in the far west, some brightness as we end the day, albeit with a few showers coming along. But for many, we keep the rain going overnight. Again, heavy at times and persistent across western and eventually central parts. In fact, the rain, if anything, peps up overnight, heading southeastwards as the night progresses, followed by showers and colder air, perhaps a touch of frost in the far north under any prolonged clear spells. But enough of a breeze, I think, to keep generally frost-free conditions. Now we say goodbye to the rain first thing Friday, and then brighter skies across much of the country. Plenty of sunshine for England, Wales, southern and eastern Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland at times seeing blue skies. But there will be quite a number of showers into Northern Ireland, parts of central and northern Scotland, some snow over the tops of the mountains. Blustery here, fine elsewhere.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Up next, Richard Tice is going to give us his thoughts on Labour and the Tories' plans to tackle knife crime, whether it's all gimmickry. It's all coming up on Britain's Newsroom on GB News. We are, of course, the People's Channel. Stay with us.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good morning. It's 10 o'clock on Thursday, the 25th of January. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Bev Turner, and Andrew Pearce.
Tackling zombie knives today, the government's going to see its third attempt since 2016 to finally ban them. The new rules being introduced to Parliament won't take effect, though, until September. Home Secretary James Cleverly had this to say.
When I became Home Secretary, I made the immediate decision to go further, to put forward this secondary legislation to support what we've already done, to make the possession of zombie knives illegal and to close the loophole. So I'm very pleased we're taking action now, and we'll be determined to get these knives off the streets.
Meanwhile, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, is launching a new youth programme, Young Futures, to tackle knife crime.
And that awful killer's to be sentenced. Valdo Calocane is being sentenced at Nottingham Crown Court today after his guilty pleas to 3 counts of manslaughter by reasons of diminished responsibility were accepted by prosecutors. Our reporter Will Hollis has more.
And the families of Calocani's victims are due to arrive here at Nottingham Crown Court any moment now to see what will become of their children's and father's killer.
And no to army draft. Downing Street has shot down comments by the head of the UK Army that we all must be ready to train and equip for future conflicts.
And that sentencing is controversial, isn't it? Because he was allowed to plead guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. So people say, oh, he was ill. He should have been convicted of murder, in my view.
Well, where's the line? It's interesting, isn't it? Paranoid schizophrenic, also had been sectioned 4 times and was still walking the streets.
He was the embodiment of evil, I'm afraid.
Let us know your thoughts this morning. GBviews at gbnews.com. First, though, the very latest news with Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you very much. These are your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The government's defending its record on tackling knife crime amid a third crackdown in just 8 years. The Home Secretary says the new restrictions are aimed at closing what he called a loophole that allowed some types of zombie-style knives to be sold. James Cleverly says the fresh legislation will strengthen the definition of the dangerous knives.
I became Home Secretary. I made the immediate decision to go further, to put forward this secondary legislation to support what we've already done, to make the possession of zombie knives illegal and to close the loophole. So I'm very pleased we're taking action now. We have seen a reduction in crime. We have a plan to drive it down further. That plan is working. We're determined to take these knives off the streets.
However, former Met Police detective Peter Blexley told GB News only clear and robust policing coupled with stop and search can keep the streets safe.
I'm not going to criticise the further legislation. If the government want to push that through, then absolutely fine. But it's not really tackling the nub of the matter. There is an absolute epidemic of knife crime in our country. People are losing their lives on virtually a daily basis. And that's not to mention all the people that get stabbed and only survive due to the brilliance of the surgeons and the nurses and the doctors. It's absolutely out of hand.
Questions remain over the downing of a plane near Russia's border with Ukraine yesterday that killed all 74 people on board. The Kremlin's accusing Ukraine of targeting the aircraft, which it says was carrying prisoners as part of a planned exchange. Ukraine hasn't confirmed whether it opened fire. It says a prisoner swap was due to take place, but Russia did not inform them of how the prisoners would be transported or of an approaching aircraft. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says more clarity was needed, but it's clear Russia is playing with the lives of Ukrainian prisoners and their loved ones. A 17-ton consignment of family-sized tents will be flown into Gaza today as part of an agreement between Britain and Qatar. It's after the Foreign Secretary's trip to Jerusalem yesterday, where he called on the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to consider a two-state solution with the Palestinians. Netanyahu recently rejected that proposal, saying it would endanger the state of Israel. Lord Cameron warned of unimaginable suffering in Gaza and called on Israel to open up more crossing points into the area.
It's important that we have treble British aid, and what you can see behind me is more aid going in. But you're right, it's vital we can actually get it into Gaza, and crucially, once it's in Gaza, get it around Gaza. What I was saying yesterday to the Israelis, they've got to deal with the bottlenecks. They've got to make sure the crossing points are open more often. They've got to make sure the checking is done more quickly. They've got, crucially, to give the visas to the UN staff and the trucks that the UN staff need to get the aid around Gaza.
More work is needed to tackle obesity among children amid warnings that increases due to the COVID pandemic could cost more than £8 billion. A new study found obesity in England rose significantly among those aged 4 and 5 and 10 and 11 years old. Researchers warn that costs will climb because overweight children and teenagers tend to become obese adults. They cited homeschooling and staying indoors during lockdowns as the key reasons for that increase. The Ghanaian equivalent of the crown jewels will be sent back to the West African nation as part of a loan from the Victoria and Albert Museum and the British Museum. The 32 precious items were taken during wars in the 19th century. They include a sword of state, gold badges worn by officials of the king, and a gold peace pipe. The museums are prevented by law from returning the items permanently, But V&A Director Tristram Hunt says there's a responsibility to share objects with their countries of origin wherever possible. And 2 statues commemorating Australia's colonial history have been vandalised in Melbourne as the country prepares to mark its annual Australia Day. Police are investigating after a century-old statue of Captain Cook was sawn off at the ankles in a popular park. The monument was also graffitied with the words, "The colony will fall." Elsewhere, a statue of Queen Victoria in the city centre was covered in red paint. It comes as the country prepares to mark its controversial Australia Day tomorrow, which observes the arrival of the first fleet of British ships in 1788. Australia's government recently ruled out a referendum on becoming a republic in the near future. Those are your top stories on GB News. Across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now back to Andrew and Bev.
10:07, thank you for joining us this morning. You've been getting in touch at home about this idea that we might all be conscripted, even though the government have been at pains to say this is not going to happen. You can all calm down and unpack your suitcases. Tim has said, I am 53, fit and healthy, semi-retired. I can run 10 miles and shoot well with a rifle. Our reserves, however, rejected my application. Why does the Army not want older men?
Yeah, good point. And an Army veteran, Ian, says the forces are great careers for privately educated, privileged officers and not for ordinary working-class men and women. It's not all what it seems. Sorry to hear that, Ian, because I thought it probably was a good career option.
And also, Tim, 53 is not older, let's be honest. So just want to point that out as well. Says Richard Tice, giggling to my left. We'll get to you in a minute, Tice. Craig says, as someone who spent over 40 years in the TA or the Army Reserves, I have seen many so-called defence reviews. The recruiting process is now the responsibility of a civvy company, and it can take months to actually get in the reserves, leaving a lot of recruits disappointed and not willing to carry on with the process. How interesting.
When I was growing up, there was an Army recruitment office in Swindon High Street, and I think they're in every town. Amazing, because the Army, in those days, it was a big career option, and it was a really... everybody went in.
Yeah. Good morning, Richard Tice. We will bring you in. And also Sam Fells is here, one of our favourite men from the legal profession.
What do you think about conscription? What do you think about that, Jen? Was he just trying to embarrass the government over the contraction of the military?
I suspect he was being very strategic. The reality is that our armed forces have been completely hollowed out.
Yeah.
Over the last 14 years. I resigned from the Conservative Party back in 2011 over the then Strategic Defence Review, which was a disgrace then. So, yeah, I got pretty strong views about it. You have to have a strong deterrent. I mean, the best way to prevent war is to have a strong deterrent. And the way to guarantee peace is prepare for war. And as you know, I've just come back last night from Ukraine, which I've never been to a war zone before. It's absolutely extraordinary, where you see a whole society mobilise for war, to the extent where you've got 12-year-old children in their bedrooms after school helping to design and develop drones for the war effort. And that's the sort of whole society, because they don't want to be invaded by Russia. And it was extraordinary. So I was there, and it's quite... I've taken a bit of flack from certain folk.
A lot of flack.
You have. We've just sorry to interrupt you, because we've got some stuff we want to show you, Richard, before you respond to this. A few people weren't very happy about this. So this is some examples. We just want to let the public... So Roberta has said Richard Tice is in Ukraine helping to keep the war going. Don't vote for the Reform Party. Rob said Richard Tice could have raised money to support homeless veterans sleeping rough on our streets instead of flying over to Ukraine to witness the delivery of a few 4x4s. Use your vote wisely. Zach has said really laudable stuff from Richard Tice over the last 48 hours, although it's sad to see a lot of Reform UK supporters saying his stance in Ukraine, saying what they're saying in the comments. Make no mistake, if Putin wins in Ukraine, we'll be at war with Russia within 10 years. So it was very divisive.
Yeah, listen, right, so let's just get some facts on the table. There's over 1,000 4x4 pickups with British number plates on that have been taken over there by British volunteers, full of medical supplies, to keep Ukrainian soldiers alive in that critical first hour. Because the supplies we're taking over, and I took over dozens of boxes in the back of the truck I was driving, those are what the soldiers want. And literally, there are hundreds of Ukrainian soldiers alive today because of what we've been doing. And that was privately raised donations, and the gratitude from Ukrainian society for what we in the UK are doing, raising their money, is extraordinary, and you only sense it when you're there. But that last point is absolutely right. The Ukrainians, they're not only fighting to save their sovereign nation that they love, they're actually fighting for the freedom of the West. Because if Putin wins, anybody that thinks that he's just going to stop there and that's enough is at best being deeply naive. They are fighting for the freedom of the West because he'll go into the Baltic states.
How do we know that? I don't know why politicians talk with such confidence about that.
Who thought he was going to go into Ukraine?
Oh, he's been going on for 8 years.
Right,
He absolutely was always going to defend the Russian people.
So you're happy to take the risk. So when he goes into one of those Baltic states, you say, oh, well, maybe I won't go to the next one, and he won't go to the next one. When are you prepared to stand up, right, against a bully? Whether it's in the school playground or whether it's as sovereign nations, if you don't stand up to a bully, they despise weakness and they will take advantage of it.
I'm all for defending the Ukrainian people. I think it's horrific what's happened to all of those civilians over there. But I can't quite buy into this idea that if we don't stop him there, he will, maraud across Europe.
But you're prepared to take the risk.
He never said that.
You're prepared. He never said he was going to. He never said he was going to invade Ukraine. No, he didn't. Before he went in, he said he wasn't.
Soviet Union.
He never said he was going to Ukraine.
Donbass region, he wanted back.
So you're prepared to take the risk. So when he goes into the Baltic states or into Poland, what do you do then? Because we haven't got the weapons, we haven't got the people, so very quickly you're straight to nuclear war, or you just let him walk over all of us. Is that what you're prepared to do?
I don't know. I don't have the same faith that that's his ambition.
Well, I don't believe anything he says, and I'm more with you, Richard. But Nigel Farage, we asked Nigel about your trip to Ukraine yesterday. I think we've got a clip of what Nigel said. This is what Nigel Farage says when we asked, would you go to Ukraine like Richard Tice? This is what he said. Talking of wars, your colleague Richard Tice, of course, we're going to speak to him a little later. He's in Ukraine. He's taken a great convoy of military aid there. Are we going to see you in a convoy to Ukraine taking military aid, Nigel?
I don't think so, Andrew. No. Good for Richard. If that's what people want to do, I think good for them. I just have this feeling about the Ukraine war that nobody in a position of global authority seems to have even considered the option. Maybe we can stop death on a massive scale and maybe sit down and start to have some negotiation.
From a position of deep weakness. I mean, a one-sided ceasefire is called surrender. The way to negotiate with someone like Putin is he knows that you are a serious deterrent. If Trump had been president, there's no way Putin would have gone into Ukraine because he wouldn't have been able to take the risk about what Trump would have done. Yeah. And that's how you create a grown-up deterrent. That's what you've got to do. So, yes, of course, you sit down and negotiate, but you do that from a position of strength.
The irony is, of course, if Trump wins, he may cut off the aid to Ukraine.
Trump hasn't told people what to do. No. That's the whole point of being an unpredictable negotiator. Yeah. The other side don't know what you're going to do. That's why even Trump's detractors, the back end of his first term, said actually on foreign policy, he was achieving things.
And Rishi Sunak was out there a week ago and he pledged another £2.5 billion of taxpayer support for Ukraine. Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah,
at a time when the NHS is in crisis and schools are in crisis?
If you were running the country properly and we were growing, that would be... You wouldn't be having that discussion. We've got no growth, they're running the country very badly. But it's not mutually exclusive. We can do both, right? I repeat again that if we degrade, if the Ukrainians degrade Russian military might in Ukraine, then that is reducing the likelihood that Russia will attack other Western allies' interests. And that is a very good thing indeed. And look, the analogy with the homeless is a completely false analogy. We can do both. Of course we shouldn't have homeless veterans, but that's due to the incompetence of our own managers here. It's not because we said we can't put any money there because we spent it over there. We can do both, and we can do both really well. But you can only do that with competent leadership and determination. And sadly, at the moment, that's not what we've got.
We've also wanted to talk about knife crime. We've got with us Sam Foles, who's one of our favourite lawyers. We often disagree, Sam. The government finally say they're going to ban the sale of zombie knives. It's taken since 2016. This is the third attempt. Why is it so difficult to do something which, on the surface, should be simple?
Well, I think it was an astonishing bit of incompetence, the first bit of drafting for this bill. The first attempt to ban these zombie knives said they're going to ban knives if they've got a curved or a serrated edge or a certain type of shape, and if they include anything on the knife that indicates that it's going to be used for a violent purpose. I don't know if you've seen these knives. They look like something out of a video game, quite what other purpose they could be used for. You're not going to chop carrots with them. No. But all that manufacturers did was just took all the writing off the knives and the pictures. And so they immediately, exactly the same knife became lawful again. And it was just an unnecessary caveat. And that's just a technical mistake that people are making. However, we don't want to be too harsh on them because ultimately we do use knives in our day-to-day lives. We use knives for cooking, we use knives for all sorts of things. So you can't just say anything with a blade is out. So drawing a line is problematic, is difficult. In this case, they did it in a very bad place, essentially.
So now, what are the changes now then that we? I hear what you're saying because it was the branding. So on these knives, it might have said. People think, what does that mean? It might have said something like "killer zombie knife" down the side of it with some of the branding. You could buy it online, and apparently that would make a good thing to have in your bedroom. They've taken that away. That was one of the things which is now. That was the first round. What are they doing now, Sam? That means that they will be banned again.
So the key thing was changing this provision, so it's now purely based on the shape of the knife, which seems to be fairly obvious. But the government are also going further, and they're talking about mandatory minimum sentencing if you're caught carrying them, and so harsher penalties. And again, I think it's right that these things should not be in the public sector, and you shouldn't be able to run around with one. Simply just getting harsher and just looking tougher might get a few of them off the streets, but ultimately it's not going to solve the problem of why people want to have these things in the first place.
And that's a systemic problem, isn't it? And they've got to get to grips with, is it an absence of a father figure?
I'm sorry,
gangs?
It's the utter incompetence of this government. This latest thing they talk about, we might bring it in September.
I know.
How many people are going to die by September? My definition of urgent is today or by the end of the week. It's ridiculous, this stuff. And I'm sorry, anybody caught carrying a knife, I'd take them, I'd build thousands of detention places, I'd take them off the streets 3 to 5 years. Yeah. No messing, no nonsense, no waffle. And I tell you what, people will learn that you don't carry a knife.
They can do it quickly because the dangerous dogs thing to get the bully dogs off the streets went through in a matter of days.
Look at the incompetence of this tragedy over Barnaby Webber.
Awful.
And just awful. And it's pure incompetence. And it's just not good enough for people to sit there and say, well, that's a breach of civil liberties. And, you know, if you don't create a deterrent, back to the previous discussion, then bad people will take advantage of it, whether it's people in knife crimes, drug gangsters and criminals here in the UK, or dictators over in Ukraine.
And Labour are talking about their proposals today. They do not mention stop and search, Sam. Isn't that a big part of eliminating knife crime, getting the knives off the kids?
No, I think it's the opposite, actually.
Of course you do.
And, you know, it's all very well to talk tough and look tough, and that's good politics. And I'm not even going to talk to you about civil liberties today.
Good.
You know, rarely for me. I'm just going to talk about, is it going to work? Because you can fair enough, send someone to jail for 5 years. If they're just going to come out and do exactly the same thing again, get into the same gangs, live the same lifestyle, struggle with the same causes that put them in that place in the first place, all you've done, you haven't solved the problem. You've just kicked the can down the road for 5 years.
Hang on. You've solved it for 5 years while they're in jail. That's point number one. Point number two is their mates will suddenly realise, well, Jimmy's gone off to jail for 5 years. I don't want that. I'm not carrying a knife. And
but if that was the case, surely it would have happened so far. We've had 20 years of, you know, from Blair, tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. 20 years of just, you know, looking like big men and doing harsher and harsher sentences.
Because they haven't done what I suggest.
And it's never worked.
We've had 20 years of waffle, and we've had no years of action and proper deterrence. That's the reality.
Well, but in practice, we've seen the sort of sentences for these sort of crimes go up. We've seen more people put in prison for these sort of crimes, and it's just not worked because you haven't dealt with the reason that people commit these crimes in the first place.
What would you do, Sam? I know you're here as a lawyer, not a politician, but go on.
And I bet you mentioned civil liberties.
I'm going to do it without mentioning civil liberties. It's a bit like the news quiz, isn't it? You need to invest in developing communities. We've seen and I think we're going to talk about this in a moment, we've seen 10 years of cuts to local authorities, cuts to everything that can give people a stake in communities, give kids something to look forward to, a reason to want something better. We've also seen 10 years of kids just being told, whatever you do, your life is likely to get worse and worse and worse. Every time we start to get on the right track, the economy crashes again, and the solution is never, let's make people's lives better. The solution is always, let's be harsher on people.
The devil makes work for idle hands, Richard Tice, and all these teenage boys who've got nothing to do except sit around, watch violent videos on their phone. At the end of the day, they go out and they take a knife. Either to defend themselves or to attack someone else or to look cool.
Actually, no, they don't all go out to take a knife. That's ridiculous. What you want them to do at school is to go out to play sports and to be engaged. And yes, we want youth centres. And yes, it was ridiculous that too many youth centres were closed down. You've got to keep people busy, and you can do that in a variety of ways. But the idea that they're just going to resort to a knife because they've got nothing else to do is absurd. People weren't doing that 40 or 50 years ago when all youngsters were probably worse off than the opportunities we've got today. I tell you what, I think it's because it's a lack of moral fibre and proper deterrence and proper respect for law and order.
And just one last word on that note, is Catherine Birbalsingh. I know she's a friend of yours, Britain's strictest head. She's been in the press all week. Are you glad, I am glad, that the way she runs that school is front and centre now?
Absolutely. I mean, I've been to that school. It's remarkable. She achieves the finest results from a school in a deprived area. It's a converted office building without a playground. And I don't think many of her children are picking up knives when they go home. So when you're
Prime Minister, Richard Tice, you're going to make all schools like Britain's strictest head?
I'm not going to answer that.
We've run out of time anyway. Sam, Richard, great to see you both. We're going to be talking about this awful case just after the break. This is, of course, the triple killer, Valdo Kalakane, killed those students, Grace O'Malley Kumar, Barnaby Webber and school caretaker Ian Coates. He's going to be sentenced today. We'll have the very latest on that. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Carson, this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
10:26 with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Now, Valdo Calacane is being sentenced at Nottingham Crown Court today after his guilty pleas to manslaughter were accepted.
The court heard he was suffering a serious mental illness when he stabbed 3 people to death in Nottingham. If you can't remember the tragic incident, here's a clip from when it broke on this show. Well, ongoing breaking news. Police are dealing with a major incident in Nottingham which has seen the city centre effectively closed down, the tram network suspended.
That's right. We're going to speak to an eyewitness now who saw the events unfold.
Undercover police car and armed police had run out, and what we saw, a man had been dragged out of a white van. He'd been tasered, he'd been pinned down essentially. He was resisting arrest slightly. But the police eventually did arrest him, and then more police later turned up.
To me, that it might be terrorism.
And we're just hearing, Mark, that there are 3 people are dead.
Is that's
just what we're hearing? We're just hearing it now. It's been confirmed by the police.
It's an
extraordinary story. Yeah, so he's being sentenced at Nottingham Crown Court. Joining us from the court is our reporter, Will Hollis.
Morning, Will. What are we expecting to hear and at what sort of time?
Yes, well, this will be the final time that not only Valdo Calacane, who also goes by the name Adam Mendez, who admitted the killings of Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar and Ian Coates last summer, but it is also the final time that those victims' families will be arriving here to see what will become of their children and father's killer. We're expecting the sentencing to appear live as major cases do now happen, broadcast for you on TV at around 11:30. For the last week, what we've been hearing are victim impact statements spoken by the victims' families, as well as psychiatric reports into the state of Valdo Calacane's mental health. Valdo Calacane pleaded under the grounds of diminished responsibility because he has paranoid schizophrenia and was not able to plead guilty to murder. Now the family is actually just arriving here. They're stepping outside of minibuses, and you can see in the background all of the cameras and journalists waiting, because this is not just a significant case for Nottingham, this is a significant case for Britain.
All right, that's Will Hollis at Nottingham Crown Court. And we're joined now by Julia Taylor, who's a psychiatric nurse. Julia, the grief for these 3 families is all the more worse because this was entirely avoidable, because this young man had been detained under the Mental Health Act 3 times, and he should not have been walking the streets.
Well, it's an absolute travesty for the families. I can't begin to, I mean, my heart goes out to them all. It must be awful. That he was detained, but then he was obviously risk assessed as not a risk to others. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been out and about.
Julia, who?
I also know.
So I was just going to. Sorry, carry on. I'll let you finish. We have so many questions. Carry on.
I also know that the police were after him for 9 months, I believe. Now, was he on medication? I'd like to know that. Was he taking his medication? Was he he obviously was being nursed in the community. Did he have a CPN? They couldn't have discharged him from services. They would have had to do what's known as a 117 review, at least yearly, to make sure that he's safe to be out in the community. I can't get my head around how it actually happened, to be fair.
So in your experience, when you work with patients who have paranoid schizophrenia like that, have you had times when you've seen them walk out of the door from your ward and you know they have the potential to cause violence?
No, I haven't. I used to work in forensic mental health nursing, which is criminals in mental health hospitals, and I've got a lot of experience with patients with schizophrenia. And what happens is they get risk assessed before they even leave the ward. They can't get out. They have to be let out by somebody. They have to be checked when they come in to make sure they haven't got any weapons or anything that's dangerous. They always get spoken to before they go out. They're seen by a consultant every single week, at least weekly. They're seen by their nurse every day. They're spoken to. They're included in groups. We always risk assess people. That's why I can't get my head around somebody who was that paranoid. He was clearly hearing command hallucinations that made him then go on, because he said voices were telling him to do that, that made him then go on to kill those people. How did that get missed?
Sorry, I was just going to say, what? Just tell everybody kind of what paranoid schizophrenia is. What does it involve for the person? What kind of treatment is there?
Yeah, sadly, schizophrenia is awful. It's a horrible, debilitating condition where you either get visual or auditory hallucinations or both. And you can also have delusional ideas where you may think things, you may think you might get command hallucinations, people telling you to do things. And this is constant. The only treatment really for schizophrenia is talking therapies and combined with usually antipsychotic medication. Was he taking his medication? Had he been missing appointments? Was he to be seen? Was he having a depot? Was he having oral meds? I don't know the ins and outs of it all to be able to make a proper judgment. But it sounds to me like he's been at high risk and it's been missed. But if I was in the community now and I was to be seeing a patient with schizophrenia with a risk history and he didn't come to that appointment, I'd be worried. I'd be wanting him found. I'd be wanting him checked. Has he had his meds? I would be contacting the police to look for him, but the police were already looking for him for 9 months.
OK, thank you, Julia. OK, really interesting. Thank you for your clinical insight. It is fascinating, isn't it?
Next, we're going to find out why he's being sentenced for manslaughter, and not as many of you who are watching and listening to the programme think murder. We're going to talk to our barrister, Sam Fowles, about that. All that, much more up to your news with Tatiana.
Andrew, thank you very much. It's 10:33. These are your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The government is ending its record on tackling knife crime amid a third crackdown in just 8 years. The Home Secretary says the new restrictions are aimed at closing what he called a loophole that allowed some types of zombie-style knives to be sold. James Cleverly says the fresh legislation will strengthen the definition of the dangerous knives.
I became Home Secretary. I made the immediate decision to go further, to put forward this secondary legislation to support what we've already done, to make the possession of zombie knives illegal and to close the loophole. So I'm very pleased we're taking action now. We have seen a reduction in crime. We have a plan to drive it down further. That plan is working. We're determined to take these knives off the streets.
A man who killed 3 people in a stabbing spree in Nottingham will be sentenced this morning. 32-year-old Valdo Calacane killed 2 students, Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Kuma, and school caretaker Ian Coase. He pleaded not guilty to murder due to mental illness, but admitted to manslaughter. We'll have live coverage of that sentencing here on GB News. A 17-ton consignment of family-sized tents will be flown into Gaza today as part of an agreement between Britain and Qatar. It's after the Foreign Secretary's trip to Jerusalem yesterday, where he met with families of hostages who are still being held in Gaza by Hamas since the 7th of October. The Ghanaian equivalent of the crown jewels will be sent back to the West African nation as part of a loan from the Victoria and Albert Museum and the British Museum. The 32 precious items were taken during wars in the 19th century. They include a sword of state, gold badges worn by officials of the king, and a gold peace pipe. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For stunning gold and silver coins you'll always value, Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2735 and €1.1687. The price of gold is £1,585 and 11 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,536 points.
Rosland Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
to find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
.40 is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So Valdo Calacane is being sentenced at Nottingham Crown Court this morning after his guilty pleas to manslaughter were accepted.
So barrister and columnist Perspective Sam Fowles is still with us. Sam, I don't get it. Look, I know this man's got mental health issues, but it was a cold-blooded slaying of two young kids on their way back from a university night out.
Right.
And a caretaker who he dragged out of his van, and then he tried to kill more people. It's murder.
I think the first thing to really be clear about is the sentence could be the same. A court has the same sentencing powers. It can go all the way up to life for this sort of manslaughter.
But could you do a whole life sentence for manslaughter?
You can have a whole life for this sort of manslaughter. You can have a whole life tariff. The reason they've called it manslaughter, not murder, is because of what we call the mental element. And for murder, you have to. The court has to know beyond reasonable doubt that you 100% mean to achieve the effect.
Well, you did.
And the court can't... Well, the court clearly thought in this case, or in fact the prosecution thought in this case, because they accepted the plea, they didn't push it to murder.
The Crown Prosecution Service.
Yeah. Accepted that because he was schizophrenic and because he was therefore not in control of his own mind, they thought they couldn't achieve that level of surety that you need for a murder conviction.
Do you buy that? You've done... I know criminal law is not your thing, but do you accept that? I'd struggle with it.
I think, for me, the focus would always be on the result and on making sure we get someone off the streets and we get someone a conviction that can lead to a certain sentence. So I always take a very practical approach and don't worry too much about the name that you put on it. On the other hand, speaking from a sort of moral or political perspective rather than as a lawyer, it's not ideal that in our law we call the same thing that you would get convicted for accidentally killing someone as a result of something that was completely almost innocent, as something that clearly is not innocent and clearly is deliberate, but because of a sort of tragic illness. And in a lot of countries we have different things to reflect those different actions.
We often bear little truck with the mental health card being played in certain situations. I do think, though, with something as serious as long-term paranoid schizophrenia, effectively the court have decided he hasn't faked this mental condition, has he? Are there details about whether he was medicated or not? Do we know?
We know that he was on medication and was prescribed medication, and then when the police searched his flat, there was, I think, something like 8 months of untaken medication there. So he was supposed to be on it and wasn't taking it. Now, that is something the court might take into account when they're sentencing, because when they consider, when sentencing, they'll consider both aggravating and mitigating factors, so things that can make the sentence longer, the sentence shorter. It may be they take into account the fact that he wasn't cooperating with his treatment plan at the time.
Right.
I was very struck by what the mother of Barnaby Webber said when she did her victim statement, impact statement. She looked him in the eye and called him, she said, "You are a murderer." So she has no truck with manslaughter.
And I think he will 100% seem like that to the victims. And this is the fundamental problem we face, right? That and the problem with much of British law is that it's developed over 1,000 years. We've not sat down and had a good think about this. Manslaughter is something that has been knocking about for centuries and has sort of evolved. But it hasn't evolved to take account of what we now know about mental health and the way we now understand the human brain.
And, you know, putting myself in the shoes of those mothers and wife, of course, of Ian Coates there as well.
Your grandpa, wasn't he?
Would you sleep more easily at night thinking this was a random act of violence, or that it was a mental health condition, that there was a safeguarding risk assessment failure? I think the second is harder to deal with.
Absolutely.
Because it shouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
It didn't need to happen, this.
And there's a timeline going back to 2020 of this person's, Callakane's, involvement with mental health services.
Sectioned 4 times.
Yeah.
Indeed, and the police were indeed looking for him
because he
at the time.
A police officer who was trying to help him with his mental health.
Yeah, but we've got to remember that we are dealing with a system that is, mental health services are not one system. They're split over different agencies. Some are national, some are local.
Yeah.
And they've been facing real terms funding cuts year after year. So the people that are handling these cases are handling 30, 40 more cases at the same time. So, and I don't want to, for a moment, excuse where someone made a mistake, because clearly a mistake was being made, and I think whoever made that will be feeling it. Yeah. But we also need a system that doesn't put people in positions to make these mistakes.
I agree. We've got to move on, Sam, unfortunately. And I would say I hope it raises the conversation again whether we should bring back residential institutions.
Well,
more of them.
They closed them and they called it care in the community.
Right.
That meant no care.
We are a nation. of animal lovers, are we not? But dogs apparently have more protection under the law than cats. Did you know that? As dog-on-dog attacks can be reported to police, and motorists who hit a dog with their vehicle must report it. The same does not apply for cats. I bet you feel quite strongly.
Well,
about
I lost
this,
one of my cats, was run over.
Sorry.
And 2 of my cats were run over over the years, and the motorist didn't stop.
But if it was a dog, they'd have to, wouldn't they?
That would be the law.
A campaign has been launched to equalise rights of cats and dogs in Britain. Our reporter Anna Riley has this rather interesting story.
Cat owner Becky Quain still suffers from panic attacks after her pet was killed. She lost her beloved Moggy Freya in a dog attack last month, but police were unable to prosecute the owner.
By the looks of it, she died instantly. He'd got like the back of her leg, and she hadn't stood a chance because this dog was an XL bully who had jumped the fence and killed her in my sister's garden. I've gone into like a state of shock. I couldn't be in the house because obviously they had her body in a box, and then I've called the police, being like, look, this has happened, it's an XL bully. Even though it happened on like my sister's garden and all this stuff, I couldn't actually do anything.
After Freya's tragic death, Becky started a petition to strengthen legal protections for cats and to allow for prosecution of dog owners whose dogs attack, injure or kill cats.
I don't want other people, as much as possible, to go through what happened to me or my sister and all these people who've signed my petition, because it's like over 100,000 now, which I wasn't expecting. Yeah, I love them. I view my cats as my children. I don't have kids, but they are my kids, you know what I mean? And for her to be just taken away like that, and then I can't even do anything legally. Like, we had to pay for her to be cremated at the vets. I didn't even get an apology from the owners, nothing. Like, it's wrong.
The calls to change the law are supported by the Sheffield Cat Shelter, who have been working to help and rehome cats since 1897.
Cats should have the same rights. You know, they're family pets, and people who lose a cat to a dog attack or to a road traffic accident, you know, they feel the same trauma and the same loss that a dog owner does. So cats are just as valuable as dogs, but at the moment the law doesn't see that. It's only fair that they have the same rights and the same protection. So if this petition goes to a government level and they decide to back the changes, we'd love that, and it would give cats so much more protection, really.
With more than 100,000 signatures on the petition, there's certainly a strength of feeling from the public that more should be done to legally protect cats. Anna Riley, GB News.
Operation. Oh, talking of cattiness, we've got Carol Malone in the studio.
Oh, very nice.
I nearly said,
did you wait?
Do you know what,
to
Carol?
save that joke?
I nearly said talking of cats and dogs. I thought, well, that would sound awful because you're looking fabulous. We've also got author and broadcaster Nikki Hodgson in the studio with us. Morning, ladies.
And of course, Malone is a great dog lover, has to be said.
I'm a massive dog lover. I'm just telling them a story about how my little dog's got arthritis in his shoulders, and he's just 5. I can't believe it.
So does that cost a fortune?
It will cost a fortune when he has the stem cell treatment in him.
You're having
Stem cell. Amazing.
I do the same for my dog, though. I've got Mini Dash and Herbie. I'm actually obsessed with him.
Are you really?
Yeah.
Yes.
So money is no money would be no bar.
No, in fact, I once had a conversation with my husband. I said, how much would you pay to get Herbie back if he was stolen? And he said, 10 grand. And I was like, what? I was like, life savings are going if he goes. Everything.
Oh, well, my
Mine
goodness.
are just about to go. Actually, no, I'm insured.
Right, well, talking of people for who have more money than sense as well, shall we move to Harry and Meghan? Right. Carol, what have they done? They've gone to a premiere in Jamaica.
What they've done is they've gone to a premiere of a Bob Marley movie in Kingston in Jamaica. But the controversial thing, and God knows why they've gone there. I mean, either they're such big Bob Marley fans, they have to cross the continent to get there. But anyway, the crime, in quotes, that they've committed is they have posed alongside Jamaica's Prime Minister, a guy called Andrew Holness. Now, Andrew Holness has made clear last year, when Wills and Kate were visiting, that he wants Jamaica separated from the Commonwealth, from Britain. He wants to break free, so much so that, in fact, he's going to have a referendum later this year to ask the Jamaican people if they want to be separate. Now, Harry knows full well that the Queen, how much the Queen loved the Commonwealth. He knows that. And what he's doing, this is like him sticking 2 fingers up at the palace and just saying, you know, he's showing his disdain for the institution by posing alongside someone who holds the monarchy and the Commonwealth in similar disdain. But the really shocking thing is that you know, there is talk in Jamaica that they want to be separated from us because they perceive Britain now to be a racist country. Now, that would fit in very well with Meghan's agenda, who also thinks Britain is a racist country, but she particularly thinks that the monarchy is racist and that the royal family themselves are racist. So on every level, this is an insult to
Do you think it was a deliberate two fingers up to the royal family then, Nikki?
I do think it was deliberate, but I slightly disagree with Carol because I think what's done for Jamaica with the Commonwealth is the Windrush scandal. I think so many people have just thought, well, what was that for? I came here, I worked hard, I paid my taxes, I served this country, and then you've kind of said, oh, we don't respect your right to stay in this country. Obviously, you know, Jamaica's been independent since, what, 1961? So there's been a long time for people to sort of think, well, why do we still have a British head of state? And King Charles himself knows that popularity is kind of waning. I think it's natural that we just part ways from them.
I don't think that's a problem, actually, Nikki, but I think the fact this guy wants to just break up the Commonwealth, which really was hugely important to the Queen, and we know if Harry had stayed within the royal family, he was going to deploy with his wife, who loves to tell us that she's a woman of colour, to do a lot of work in the Commonwealth. So there he is. Yeah. Here he is now, posing for photographs with a guy who wants to wreck it from within, which I think it's unconscionable.
I understand, but his opinion, his belief, whether we believe it's actually his belief or not, is that, you know, the Commonwealth is effectively colonial, that we have treated certain states, you know, with disdain.
But Harry's giving it credence. But Harry's giving it credence by being with them.
Well, right, but he's, you know, that's the line that he would trot out, isn't it? I mean, I find it really interesting that actually one of the biggest problems with Commonwealth countries is the fact that they have terrible LGBT laws. You know, like in Jamaica, it is really, really dangerous to be a gay man. And that law is a Victorian law that came from Britain. Now, if you want to do something good for the Commonwealth, why do you start repealing all that stuff or working on campaigning on that?
There's about 30 countries, actually, in the Commonwealth where it's very difficult to be gay.
Absolutely.
Because I've been to one or two of them and I thought, oh dear.
But that's a sort of nuance that Harry and Meghan won't think about in a situation like this, isn't it, Carol?
I think they're motivated by spite and revenge, and I think that's exactly what this is about. Why would you go to Kingston, Jamaica, to watch a movie?
Yeah, you could watch
seriously?
Watch it in California.
Oh, there's such big
watch it in California. I've never noted it. Had you?
No, not at all. And I just think they know this was going to get them worldwide coverage. They need to keep their profiles up to make more money, to get more contracts. We know their popularity in America is waning. They're the butt of jokes at every big gathering there is now. So I think they did this on purpose.
You see, Meghan might say, look, where was she from? Was she Jamaican, her roots? I can't remember where.
Actually.
She would say, my Afro-Caribbean background is important to me. Yeah. I am a woman, a mixed-race woman of colour, and therefore I am now separated from the royal family. I am free to go and support...
Separated to a point.
Yeah,
I'll have my kids' titles and I'll keep my title.
Promote the issues that are important to me, and I think she's sort of free to do that.
She is free to do that, but it's just kind of very convenient that it comes off the back of that very, very negative press trip that Kate and Wills went on, remember, and there's terrible pictures of shaking hands through the fences and all that kind of stuff.
But also, she shouldn't be going as a princess. If this is what she thinks, take the titles away. Go and campaign for what you like. Campaign for any issue you want, but stop dragging the title around with you and using it to make money. I think that's what annoys a lot of people. They're monetised.
They have to keep the title.
Right, ladies, we've come to the end of that first section. Sorry it's so brief. You will be back in a little while, but still to come. Generation Fat. We're going to be discussing what has led to the largest increase in child obesity in decades and what we can do about it.
They're eating too much.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. The storms have gone. Doesn't mean it's fine and sunny out there today. There are a lot of cloud around, some rain, but it is pretty mild. That's because we've got these weather fronts moving across the country, and in here, between these two weather fronts, some pretty warm air. But it is cloudy air as well, and it's a fairly grey afternoon. Some brightness possible over parts of eastern England. It may brighten up at times across the north of Northern Ireland and the west coast of Scotland. But for most, it's fairly dull. Outbreaks of rain working north across Scotland, and then some heavier rain coming into parts of northwest England and North Wales for a time. A bit damp elsewhere, but it is mild. Temperatures in double digits, maybe up to 13 Celsius if it brightens up over parts of eastern England. This evening and overnight, we'll keep further outbreaks of rain and drizzle over northern England, Northern Ireland and Wales, and then some heavier rain comes in across Scotland for a time. That band will work its way across most areas through the night. Behind it turns a bit colder. Could be some snow showers across northern Scotland, mostly over hills. Could turn icy here as well as temperatures tumble. For most, though, temperatures will hold up in the low single digits. Could be a wet start across East Anglia, but the rain quickly zooms away here. And actually for most, tomorrow's a dry, bright, fine day. A bit breezy in places, and there will be more showers coming into Scotland with some further snow over the hills. But for most, as I said, it's dry and bright. On Friday, we'll see some sunny spells, a cooler, fresher feel, and temperatures about average for the end of January.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Carson, this Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
11 a.m. on Thursday, the 25th of January. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Very good morning. So, tackling zombie knives. Today we'll see the government's third attempt since 2016 to ban so-called zombie knives. The new rules being introduced to Parliament won't take effect until September, which see these specific sorts of knives and machetes being banned. Home Secretary James Cleverly had this to say.
When I became Home Secretary, I made the immediate decision to go further, to put forward this secondary legislation to support what we've already done, to make the possession of zombie knives illegal and to close the loophole. So I'm very pleased we're taking action now and will be determined to get these knives off the streets.
And the Labour leader Keir Starmer is also on the same agenda. He's launching a youth programme called Young Futures to tackle knife crime. Our political correspondent Olivia Utley has the latest.
The government's planning to close the loophole in the law on zombie knives, but Labour is saying it's just not enough. So what would Keir Starmer do differently? Find out more with me very soon.
And killer to be sentenced. Valdo Calacane is being sentenced at Nottingham Crown Court today after killing 3 people last year. We will bring you that as it happens.
And the Woke Awards, yes, you've heard it. The Brit nominations are out. Last year, there were no women nominated in the gender-neutral category. Can you believe this? So this year, they've more than doubled the number of nominees to try to get round it. They got rid of the male and female artists and then had Artist of the Year, and then the only 5 nominees were all men. You be careful what you wish for, you woke mob.
Honestly, and so they've now got 10 nominees and half of them, I guess, will be men, half of them will be women. Well, just have separate categories. Yeah. Drives me mad. Anyway, let us know your thoughts this morning. GBviews at gbnews.com. First, though, with your very latest news, here is Tatiana Sanchez.
Bev, thank you. 2 minutes past 11. These are your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The government's defending its record on tackling knife crime amid a third crackdown in just 8 years. The Home Secretary says the new restrictions are aimed at closing what he called a loophole that allowed some types of zombie-style knives to be kept and sold. Labour criticised the fresh legislation, saying it still doesn't go far enough and claims its plan includes tougher penalties for online platforms caught selling those banned knives. But James Cleverly says the government is taking the right action.
I became Home Secretary, I made the immediate decision to go further, to put forward this secondary legislation to support what we've already done, to make the possession of zombie knives illegal and to close the loophole. So I'm very pleased we're taking action now. We have seen a reduction in crime. We have a plan to drive it down further. That plan is working. We're determined to take these knives off the streets.
A 17-ton consignment of family-sized tents will be flown into Gaza today as part of an agreement between Britain and Qatar. It's after the Foreign Secretary's trip to Jerusalem yesterday. He met with families of hostages who are still being held in Gaza by Hamas since the 7th of October. He also met Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, calling on him to again consider a 2-state solution with the Palestinians, which he recently rejected. Lord Cameron warned of unimaginable suffering in Gaza and called on Israel to open up more crossing points into the area.
It's important that we have treble British aid, and what you can see behind me is more aid going in. But you're right, it's vital we can actually get it into Gaza, and crucially, once it's in Gaza, get it around Gaza. What I was saying yesterday to the Israelis, they've got to deal with the bottlenecks. They've got to make sure the crossing points are open more often. They've got to make sure the checking is done more quickly. They've got, crucially, to give the visas to the UN staff and the trucks that the UN staff need to get the aid around Gaza.
A man who killed 3 people in a stabbing spree in Nottingham will be sentenced this morning. 32-year-old Valdo Calacane killed 2 students, Barnaby Webber and Grace O'Malley Coomer, and school caretaker Ian Coase. He pleaded not guilty to murder due to mental illness, but admitted to manslaughter. We'll have live coverage of that sentencing over the next hour here on GB News. More work is needed to tackle obesity among children amid warnings that increases due to the pandemic could cost more than £8 billion. A new study found obesity in England rose significantly among those aged 4 and 5 and 10 and 11 years old. Researchers warn that costs will climb because overweight children and teenagers tend to become obese adults. They cited homeschooling and staying indoors during lockdowns as the key reasons for the increase. Questions remain over the downing of a plane near Russia's border with Ukraine yesterday that killed all 74 people on board. The Kremlin's accusing Ukraine of targeting the aircraft, which it says was carrying prisoners as part of a planned exchange. Ukraine hasn't confirmed whether it opened fire. It says a prisoner swap was due to take place, but Russia did not inform them how the prisoners would be transported or of an approaching aircraft. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says more clarity was needed, but it's clear Russia's playing with the lives of Ukrainian prisoners and their loved ones. The Ghanaian equivalent of the crown jewels will be sent back to the West African nation as part of a loan from the Victoria and Albert Museum and the British Museum. The 32 precious items were taken during wars in the 19th century. They include a sword of state, gold badges worn by officials of the king, and a gold peace pipe. The museums are prevented by law from returning the items permanently. But V&A Director Tristram Hunt says there's a responsibility to share objects with their countries of origin wherever possible. And 2 statues commemorating Australia's colonial history have been vandalised in Melbourne as the country prepares to mark its annual Australia Day. Police are investigating after a century-old statue of Captain Cook was sawn off at the ankles in a popular park. The monument was also graffitied with the words, "The colony will fall." Elsewhere, a statue of Queen Victoria in the city centre was covered in red paint. It comes as the country prepares to mark its controversial Australia Day tomorrow, which observes the arrival of the first fleet of British ships in 1788. Australia's government recently ruled out a referendum on becoming a republic in the near future. Those are your top stories on GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying Play GB News. Now back to Andrew and Bev.
Let's see what you've been saying at home. 11:07, knife crime. Karen has said one would only need to carry such types of fancy knives. If you wanted to kill or seriously wound someone, why would anybody else need such a knife?
I think some of them carry them. It's like a badge of honour.
Yeah, 100%.
If you want to be in my gang, you've got to carry one.
Gang crime. Richard says knife carrying can only be sorted with the risk of being caught, hence stop and search. This is the best solution for this problem.
Yeah, and Labour didn't mention stop and search, of course, because it's too contentious. Yeah,
and on this cats versus dogs in the eyes of the law, Gary has said, what about the number of wild, defenceless animals that cats kill when they're allowed outside the house? Keep them inside and it's all...
You are talking about Rosie, who is my cat, and she is a predator. She is a killer. She kills mice, she's killed squirrels, and the worst part of it is she brings them in.
Well, she's a chip off the old block then, isn't she, Mr P?
Yep.
Now, moving on. Dangerous zombie-style knives, we've just been saying, will be banned by the government as they attempt to crack down on this type of crime.
This is the 3rd time they've done this, by the way. Under the new proposals, you can surrender your blade into some form of bin.
Surrender bins.
Surrender bins. Shadow Attorney General Emily Thornby talked to us about this on GB News.
But we need to make sure that we do more and we work harder. And the things that Sadiq has done, he's been pushing in the right direction, but he needs a national government to work with as well. And what we would do if we were in the national government was that we would make sure that we had all kinds of things in place in order to make sure that we push youngsters in another direction and away from crime. So we would make sure that we had mental health workers in every single secondary school and part-time mental health workers in primary schools. We would have hubs around the country, 156 of them, that would be paid for, where we would bring everyone whose job it is to keep kids out of the criminal justice system together in order to ensure that they work together, they identify the people who are likely to be at risk and make sure that they are pushed in another direction instead.
Well, joining us now is our political correspondent, Olivia Otley, in Westminster for us. Good morning, Olivia. Is there any distinction between what Labour would do and what the Conservatives are now doing on knives, do you think?
Well, according to Labour, there absolutely is. The Conservatives today are toughening up existing laws that they've already made to outlaw zombie knives. The problem with those laws is that there were various loopholes in them. It wasn't possible for the police to seize zombie knives in a person's own home unless they had very good reason to believe that it would be involved in a serious crime. That restriction has now been lifted. Labour says, though, that it still doesn't go far enough. And what Labour is promising to do, well, firstly, it's promising a new Sure Start style programme for teenagers who are found to be in possession of knives. They'll be referred to a programme whereby they'd be tagged, they'd have curfews, etc. But they also want to close even more loopholes in the zombie knife law. What they're particularly worried about is how easy it is to buy a knife online. Lots of these websites which sell knives have just boxes where you can tick a box and say, yes, I'm over 18 years old. Very, very lax security checks. Labour promised that they would toughen that up. They also promised that they would amend the details on what sort of zombie knives are outlawed. At the moment, it's a very specific type of knife which is defined as a zombie knife. It's got a certain number of, the blade is a certain number of centimetres with two serrated edges, etc. Labour says it would implement a much wider ban on all different kinds of knives, not simply these specific zombie knives. So that's how Labour says it will go further than the Conservatives. Obviously, all of this is much easier said than done. The Conservatives have been attempting to outlaw zombie knives for, I think it's 8 years now. They've actually released 16 different press releases on the government website talking about outlawing zombie knives, and still they're having to close up loopholes. This idea of trying to crack down on selling knives to young people online is obviously very, very laudable, but again, much easier said than done. And Labour hasn't yet quite outlined precisely how it plans to go about doing that. And of course, there's still not complete clarity on how the funding would work. Keir Starmer hasn't announced any new funding for this project today. He said he would draw on £100 million, which he's already announced for youth funding, but it's not quite clear that those numbers add up, and that's what I think we'll be expecting to hear from the Conservatives over the next few days.
That's Olivia Rutley. Well, with us in studio is Henry Hill, Deputy Head of Conservative Home. I want to talk to you. We've got a lot to talk to you about, Henry, but I nearly spluttered on my cup of tea when I heard Emily Thornberry, the Shadow Attorney General, saying Sadiq Khan's moving in the right direction. No, he's not. I mean, knife crime has soared on his watch, and we've had more than 1,000 homicides in the 8 years he's been mayor.
Yeah, it's rare to hear Labour talk about Sadiq Khan at the moment, so clearly they felt they had to throw him in on something. I mean, all of this is just treating symptoms rather than causes, right? Because they ban one type of knife and then Starmer's talking about banning ninja swords. Yeah. It's actually, you can kill someone very easily with a very boring, basic knife. That's the frightening thing about them. Yeah. And ownership does not correlate to the crime rate. What used to be, people would habitually carry, like, flick knives and so on, and the crime rate was very low. So politicians will keep going after these, easier targets rather than doing controversial stuff like stop and search and actual punitive sentencing.
Labour didn't mention stop and search.
No, nor punitive sentencing. It's all about, rehabilitation and take away the thing that looks scary in a newspaper photograph.
Yeah.
What was your reaction when you read Simon Clarke's article calling on the Tories to ditch Rishi Sunak? Just so people remember, he's Sir Simon Clarke, a Middlesbrough MP. He was Chief Secretary to Treasury when Rishi was Chancellor. They worked very closely together. He welcomed him as Tory leader back in 2022. Marvellous, he said. And then a deafening silence followed his intervention.
I mean, I think I've got a particular perspective because at Conservative Home we have to cover Conservative leadership contests in a lot of detail.
Let's not have it.
And we bear the scars of those, right?
You do.
And that means that you are acutely aware of the process, right? So assuming... Well, how would getting rid of Rishi Sunak work? You'd have the drizzle of letters going in. That would be a week, 2 weeks of bad stories. You get enough, sorry, and then you have the vote. Rishi loses the vote. Now you're having a leadership contest. Who steps up? There's no candidate. There's no one with a clear alternative vision in place. It's not obvious that the Conservative Party would be able to unite around one person. That means that you go to a membership ballot. That takes weeks to organise, weeks of two candidates like Liz and Rishi taking lumps out of each other in public. And at the end of it, the public has seen the Tory party spend sort of 4 to 8 weeks entirely gazing at its own navel during a period of crisis, and you still don't have any answers. So, no, the problem with this leadership stuff is, fine, Rishi's not doing a very good job at the moment, that's perfectly acceptable, but that doesn't mean there's anyone else who could
I saw Kemi Badenoch, who's the darling of the Conservative Home members. She's their most popular minister. And I asked her about Simon Clarke's intervention, and she just said, nobody wants a leadership contest right now. Not least because he wants to own it. They want him to own the election defeat.
Well, precisely. Think about it. If you're somebody who wants to take over the leadership of the Conservative Party, there's going to be an almighty row after the election about why they lost, about why they didn't move the country in a more conservative direction after 14 years in office. No one wants to take over when you're 20 points behind in the polls with 6 months at the outside to turn it around.
And a new poll today showing Reform now on 13 points for the first time, only 7 points behind the Tories.
Yeah, I mean, it would be a very noble thing for some politician to step up, take over from Rishi Sunak purely in order to try and shave a few points off the Tories' margin of error and then be sacked as Tory leader for leading them into a cataclysmically bad general election. There's no candidate prepared to do that.
So what can they do? Because if they are facing annihilation, they have to do something, Henry.
I mean, they have to accept that they're fighting a defensive election campaign. They have to come up with a strategy that is ruthlessly targeted at areas which they can keep on side. And that's going to be very difficult because in 2019, Boris won a really broad but unwieldy coalition. There's the red wall, there's now the blue wall, those safe Tory seats that are threatened by the Liberal Democrats, and all of those MPs say it's absolutely vital that Rishi Sunak digs the trenches where they are. But if he digs all of those trenches, he's not going to be able to defend any of them. So he's going to have to make really hard decisions about where he puts his resources, where he concentrates his tax cuts in the budget. And his problem is that every MP who realises that their seat is on the outside of that bunker is going to kick off between now and the election.
They could try and govern as a Conservative party.
But what does that mean? This is the problem. The Tories have been in office since 2010. They've changed leader multiple times. They've changed direction multiple times. David Cameron, was that a Conservative government? Theresa May, a different Conservative government. Liz Truss, Boris Johnson, Rishi... And so... No, there's no agreement within the Parliamentary Conservative Party. And the problem is the Tories have always been a fairly broad church. But if a leader is strong, if they've got the mandate from the electorate, most of the time Tory MPs are a bit like sled dogs. If you give them a bit of direction, they'll pull in the right direction. But you can't do that if you're put in 20 points behind.
Henry, because you're a mega brain, I want to talk to you also about American politics while you're here. The news hot off the sort of alternative media wires at the moment is that Michelle Obama is going to be parachuted in sometime spring, summer to take over from Biden as the Democrat candidate. What do you think about that?
I mean, I personally don't currently think it's very likely. I think it's a really sad thing about the dynastic state of American politics.
Yes,
we are once again talking about the spouse of a previous president running for president. Biden is not a great candidate. You know, he's clearly struggling, and the fact that the Democratic primary hasn't been able to put up a challenger against him is worrisome. And he picked a very unpopular vice president, because normally you would expect the VP to be the person who would obviously step into the shoes after one term of Biden.
Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris is not popular. So it's possible. It's certainly possible. American politics could do that. I'm not going to rule it out. But at the moment, I would say it's maybe wishful thinking by Democrats who wish they didn't have Joe Biden.
But if she were the candidate, it would be transformative. I think she'd win.
She might, but then the interesting thing is, one, would she win? Well, she probably would, but America is even more divided than it was sort of 8 years ago. But the second thing is, Barack Obama's halo effect did not survive his presidency.
Well, we got
what would Michelle Obama's presidency actually consist of? I don't know very much about her politics or her policies.
I guess just not being Donald Trump.
But
because he is so divisive.
But you can only go so far with that kind of politics. What we're seeing in Germany, what we're seeing in France, is that if you just make your politics, we're not AfD, we're not Rassemblement National, you end up leaving no space, and you leave them the entirety of the opposition to the status quo. So that's a very dangerous position to be in. A nice centrist is not enough to govern America and solve America's problems. You need to have an actual contrary vision, and she might have one, but I've not heard about it yet.
There's one theory that the Tories will have in the general election the week after the American election, if Trump wins, which he could, because he's certainly going to be the Republican candidate, the way things are looking, that would be good for Rishi, because people would be spooked that, oh, my God, we need some stability here. Stick with the candidate we know. That's one theory that's going on from some Tory MPs. Sounds a bit fanciful to me.
I think basically people in British politics are far too invested in American politics, and they kind of read that onto the nation, which is much more sensibly kind of detached. So British politicians and journalists are obsessed with not having our leadership, our general election campaign overlap with America's. And that's mostly just because journalists will keep talking about the American election. It's not because the electorate will be confused about the issues. No. But no, I don't think it will make much of a difference either way. It will be slightly awkward for Rishi and for Sir Keir, because if the American election is ongoing, both of them will have to say relatively nice things about Donald Trump, because there is a realistic chance that as Prime Minister they would have to work with him as President.
Yeah.
And
that would be
naturally
particularly uncomfortable for Starmer.
Precisely. And if he'd already lost, then they could say Donald Trump is awful, which both of them think. But if there's a realistic chance that he's going to become the president of our biggest ally, then they will both have to be very careful on the election campaign.
It was our Lord we had in earlier in the week, and I said to him, give me in one word.
Corvair Ranger.
Corvair Ranger, thank you. Give us one word to describe the relationship between Starmer and Trump, and he hot off the bat he went awkward.
Yeah.
And I thought, actually, that was a brilliant word. Just stay with us a minute, Henry, won't you? Labour are unveiling new plans to tackle knife crime today. Did you groan, Andrew Pearce? Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper, she's in Buckinghamshire, and this is what she had to say.
Nowhere near far enough, and it's just too little too late. It doesn't include ninja swords, it doesn't include a whole series of dangerous weapons, and the penalties also aren't strong enough. They've been promising this ban on zombie knives for a long time, and it's still not going to come in until the autumn. We need much faster action at a time when knife crime has gone up by a further 5% this year, 77% increase since 2015. This is an epidemic. We need action.
Why is there a particular focus on knife crime today? And is this a particular problem, do you think, in the east of England?
Well, there's been a serious increase in knife crime, a 77% increase in the last 8 years, and a further 5% that it's increased in the last year alone. This is an epidemic affecting the entire country. We've got to have urgent action, including much stronger action on the knife crime sales that are simply not being dealt with by the government, as well as much stronger prevention, particularly among young people too.
Okay. Should government ministers ever talk about overall levels of crime without making clear that this measure misses some of the crimes that women worry about the most?
I'm extremely concerned about the missing information analysis on what's happening about crimes against women. There's real concern. Some of the most serious crimes that we have, be it around domestic abuse and sexual assaults, are some of the most serious crimes that the country faces. Labour set a plan to halve violence against women and girls, but that means we need the information, we need the analysis, and they need to be visible. We can't have these crimes simply being ignored.
So what would Labour do to make sure that those...
So, Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper there, talking about knives, funnily enough, on the day that the government are pushing through some legislation about knives. That, Henry Hill, must be a complete coincidence.
Oh, no, absolutely, yeah. No, you can't have the news agenda with one party doing something, good.
Without the others.
Like cracking down on the late...
Just like an echo chamber.
Yeah, and they each need to outdo the other, but what neither of them are doing is if you want to crack down on violent crime, what you do is you have exemplary punishment for offenders, right? You send them to prison, you keep them there.
Yeah.
You do invest in strong rehabilitation programmes, so prisons don't turn into crime schools, but you take them off the streets and you make it clear that you will get caught and you will get punished.
Yeah.
But that's what's extraordinary. We've just had Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, saying the punishments aren't strong enough, and I sit here and I go, who is the Conservative Party anymore and who are Labour?
Yeah, but the thing is, what she didn't say is, do you know why the punishments aren't strong enough? Because we don't build enough prisons, right? Like, we have not got nearly enough prison places, which means that cases take years to get to court. You're more likely to be given a suspended sentence or a community sentence, and if you do get a sentence, you serve half of it. So unless Labour come in and say, right, we're going to build 20,000 new prison places... And they won't. Then all of this is just hot air, really.
And currently, I had no idea. One sanction, if you're caught with a knife, one of these zombie knives, you can write a letter of apology. That's it.
To whom?
To whoever, to the policeman or to the magistrate.
If you've not actually committed a crime with it...
And that does assume that these louts can write.
Yeah, but I mean, it's, if you've not committed a crime with it, if you're just carrying the thing, to whom are you apologising?
I know.
Is it you writing to the king for breaking the king's peace?
It's a waste of time and energy and bureaucracy, and who came up with that?
Maybe lines. I'm a big fan of bringing back old-fashioned punishments. Sit down and write 100 lines. I will not carry a knife again. Henry Hill, great to see you, as usual. Right, still to come. Lockdown lardies. I didn't write that. Did you write that?
No, but I often use that expression, lard arse, because we've got a lot of them.
Well, tens of thousands more children are growing up obese since the pandemic. We're going to talk to former presenter of Fat Families, Steve Miller. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News is Britain's news channel, and now you can support it. All you have to do is scan that QR code that's up on your screen right now, or you can go to gbnews.com/support and become a GB News member. You'll have fantastic benefits. We're also going to organise special events where you as GB News members can meet the presenters, the on-screen faces. Scan the QR code or go to gbnews.com/support. Thank you so much.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's time to burst the Westminster bubble. Come and join me in Scunthorpe in a People's Forum on the 1st of February to discuss how decisions made here affect your lives. Is the green ideology destroying jobs? Tickets, they're going like hot cross buns. Book now. GB News, Britain's news channel.
(11:28). You're with Britain's News on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So, Generation Fat.
Are we allowed to use the word fat? Aren't we going to be shamed for fat shaming?
We'll be told off for fat shaming,
will.
I'm sure, about this. But we're going to talk to the perfect man on this, because since the pandemic, tens of thousands more children are growing up obese. It's costing the UK £8.7 billion.
Of course, obesity is now the biggest killer and problem on the NHS. Long absences from school because of COVID, a lack of physical activity and unhealthy eating habits during lockdown have been blamed for this huge increase. So, Steve Miller, you know who he is, former presenter of Fat Family. Steve, come on, whose fault is this? Is it the kids, the schools, mum and dad?
Well, I mean, first of all, a word on the fat shaming. This country's got to get over it. We talk about fat shaming. Every time you use the word fat, what do they want us to start saying? Oh, you're a wide load. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I'll tell you what didn't happen, and this is a serious point. This government did not do, in my opinion, a cost-benefit analysis when they thought about all the terrible stuff they did for our kids during lockdown. And frankly, the result of it has been that we've put a lot of kids now potentially on death row. The report that's out today, what does it say? More kids now are at risk long-term of diabetes, stroke, and some cancers. I thought lockdown for children was horrendous. It suffocated their lives in such a way that we've never known before. It suffocated their learning. It suffocated their movement. I've also got it suffocated their freedom. So what happened was these poor kids were left at home with their parents, and these kids developed these bad habits of eating lots of junk food. And I do have a degree of sympathy with the parents in terms of how difficult that must have been. So actually, the lockdown was a disaster for children. What do we do moving forward? What do we do moving forward is we stop normalising obesity. We start talking about the danger of fat more bluntly. We stop screaming and squealing the words fat shaming every time someone like me uses the word fat. And parents actually start taking more responsibility, because far too many parents do not take responsibility for their children, and they do allow their children to eat too much junk food, and by doing that they are putting them on death row. I balance that with some superb parents, of course, who do a great job.
It's not just junk food, though, is it, Steve? I mean, we use that phrase, but actually, I think for me, it's the constant grazing. It's the poor school meals. It's too much choice. I think when you have a school meal, you should be given one healthy meal and that's it. And you eat it or you go hungry, frankly. But that's a very old-fashioned view of the world, isn't it? And especially when children get older, so when they're teenagers and they're then able to go and they get in the train home from school, and on every train platform there's a vending machine that is dishing out chocolate bars and crisps. It's really difficult. I'm not excusing parents, because I've got 3 and it's a constant battle to get them to eat less sugar. But it almost sometimes feels like the weight of that industry is absolutely against us.
What we need to do is we need to learn to regain control. And to regain control, this is where the parents come in. Who's giving the kids the money to spend in the vending machines for a start? I mean, that's the first bit. And what we need to do is we need to look at Japan. Japan have a great culture when it comes to managing obesity and managing child obesity. They're brilliant at it. They don't shy away from the discussion. Children are taught being fat is wrong. Children do receive one healthy school meal, which is great. And generally speaking, you know, it's not a taboo subject to talk about how being fat is totally wrong, because it potentially.
Where do you draw the line between this? Because you've got this body positivity movement, of course, in this country, which I think did a good service to the nation, because it came at a time after sort of the Kate Moss supermodels. It came at a time of saying it may not be normal for you to be a size 6 or a size 8, and that's OK. But somehow, excuse the pun, it ballooned into something greater than that, so that you've got morbidly obese women on the front cover of Cosmopolitan magazine. Somehow we have to get that balance right, Steve. How do we do it?
Well, you see, body positive, I mean, the one thing they do say that I absolutely agree with is that rigid dieting is not good for us. They're absolutely spot on with that, and it can trigger an eating disorder, and they just don't work long term anyway. But the problem is body positive has now become this political animal where it's kind of gone from that sort of, you know, don't diet because it's not good, rigidly, but it's now become this sort of, if you're happy and you're fat, clap your hands. And maybe talk about, maybe they actually want children to sit around singing that. You know, if you're happy and you're fat, clap your hands. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
OK, Steve, we could do is balance. I'm sorry, we've got to leave it there. We could talk to you all morning, but thank you so much for your common sense. We're going to go live to Nottingham.
Going to Nottingham, where the sentence is going to be dealt out for the killer of those 2 students and a caretaker last year.
His personality has changed, and not for the better. He's lost interest in many of the things which had made his life worth living, such as socialising and football. His physical injuries were also very serious and included a dislocated right shoulder, injuries to his chest and back, and a fractured pelvis. He's in constant pain. There are times when he feels it would have been better off for everyone if he too had died that morning. Your final two victims were Sharon Miller and Marcian Gavronsky, who were both standing on a pedestrian central reservation. Again, you deliberately aimed the van at them and struck them at speed from behind, intending to kill them. They were extremely lucky to survive. Mr. Gavronsky suffered broken ribs, an injury to his left leg, and cuts all over his head and body. He continues to suffer flashbacks. Ms. Miller sustained injuries to her body and legs, which left her in severe pain and housebound for several months. She remains afraid to go out and may never be able to return to work. You were eventually stopped and contained by police vehicles. When confronted by officers, you produced a knife, which you dropped only after you'd been tasered. You later made no comment to all questions asked of you in interview. The court has both heard and read heartbreaking statements from those of your victims who survived, and the families and friends of those who died. You've sentenced them to a life of grief and pain. This is a roll call of just some of those whose lives you have devastated. Emma Webber, Barnaby's mother. David Webber, Barnaby's father. Charlie Webber, Barnaby's brother. Thomas Yap, Barnaby's close friend. Emily Yap, another of Barnaby's close friends. James Amali Kumar, Grace's brother. Sinead Amali Kumar, Grace's mother. Dr. Sanjoy Kumar, Grace's father. Catherine Amali, Grace's aunt and all of Grace's maternal relatives in Ireland. Dr. Shashi Kumar, Grace's grandmother. Sunil Kumar, Grace's uncle. Emma Kumar, Grace's aunt. Helen Prescott Morin, Grace's schoolhouse mistress, together with many other of her family friends. James Coates, Ian's son. Elaine Newton, Ian's partner. Ian's brother. Wayne Burkett, your fourth victim. Tracy Hodgson, Wayne's partner. Sharon Miller and Marcin Gavronsky, your final victims. I pay tribute to the extraordinary dignity and restraint which they've shown, both in this court and indeed over the last 6 months. The statements that were so bravely read out in court will resonate with those who heard them for many years to come. We learnt that Barnaby was a loving son, brother and friend, with an infectiously joyful personality and a positive outlook on life. He was making the most of his time he was spending at Nottingham University and showing such great promise for the life of which you robbed him. Grace was a treasure to her family and friends. She was as successful academically as she was in her sporting achievements. Studying medicine, she'd already been involved in vaccinating against the COVID virus, and I do not doubt that she would have been an exemplary practitioner. She was a shining example to all who knew and loved her. Ian was only 5 months short of what should have been a long and happy retirement. His son, sister and partner had been robbed of a kind and humble man who also always found time to help others. There was never any doubt that it was you who committed these appalling crimes, and it was inevitable that you would be facing 3 counts of murder and 3 of attempted murder. It soon became clear, however, that the central issue in this case would relate to whether, at the time of committing these offences, you were suffering from...
So that is the judge delivering his sentence, which we will bring you when we get it, in the horrific killing of those 3 people in Nottingham. But up at noon, we've got Good Afternoon Britain with Tom and Emily. So what are you doing on the show this afternoon?
Yes, depending on how long the sentencing remarks there are, we may be delivering that sentencing, of course, and then we'll be talking about what's happened and the fallout of this horrific triple
Because, of course,
knife attack.
the defence from the suspect here, from the person who is being sentenced, is expected to be mitigated through mental health health claims. And there's a big controversy over that. We'll be diving into that a little bit. But also there are some big political issues in the news today, not least a policy now being floated in the papers of British homes for British workers. Now, this is a policy being floated by the government. They didn't put it in the King's speech last year, but they might now be pursuing it, whereby people who are British citizens get ultimate priority for social housing rather than those who've recently arrived.
It's quite interesting because...
So a government can compel a local council to do that, the housing authority, is that what they're saying?
Well, they're consulting on it.
Exactly. So we don't yet know all of the details, but there has already been big pushback from various housing charities.
Of course there has.
Against the government's proposals. So we'll wait for that consultation, but it does seem like this is something the government is now looking more at when they did sort of put it on the back burner last year.
And Tom, very voter-friendly.
Yeah, very voter-friendly. Is this just common sense that people born in the United Kingdom should have priority when it comes to social housing? The likes of Shelter, the homeless charity, of course, they've come out and they've immediately said this is scapegoating people and that this isn't the issue when it comes to housing. So there you go, a bit of a battle between some of the charities and the government on this one, if it goes further.
Speaking of battles, there's another battle, of course, that now has been dominating headlines for some time, which is, are we ready for war? And we've got perhaps someone who...
You look great in army uniform, Tom.
I think I would.
You would, yes.
Well, do you know what? I had some conversations about this with some people on social media this morning. I've learnt that the average Russian is about 3 inches shorter than me, so I reckon I could take them.
Oh, really? That is
but
interesting.
we will be asking if Generation Z is up for the fight.
Well, I think it's
You
really
would be
interesting.
hopeless, Tom. You have
think you'd be
many
very
strengths.
good, Tom.
One of them would not be surely getting down in the
Do you think I'd be better?
Imagine all the mud.
I have to stress, the debate isn't could Tom Harwood take a Russian?
Right,
the debate is could Generation Z.
Defend our country.
I think just to stand up for myself here, I reckon I could.
I think you'd be a very good platoon leader.
I hope I would be one of those people going over the trenches with the platoon rather than sitting several trenches back.
But I mean, this is a serious question.
It is.
I mean, it's not all laughs and giggles.
No,
it is a serious question. Could Gen Z and millennials, to a lesser extent, defend our country?
Yeah.
Although, do you know what? Millennials, we talk about millennials as if they're very, very young. Some millennials are now in their 40s.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Right, Tom, Emily, you will be holding the fort for us from midday. Now, a quick break. We'll be back in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 11:45 for Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner. The panel are back. Broadcasting journalist Carol Malone and author and broadcaster Nikki Hodgson.
So, should we start with Brit Award nominations, ladies? So, these are out now. Nikki, last year they went gender neutral, and what happened?
There were no women involved. That's what happened. And I think we could have all told
Be
them
careful
that.
of what you wish for.
I know. Well, look, I'm probably much more left-wing than Carol is. I know I am for a fact.
You definitely
and
are.
I've probably got quite different attitudes to you on gender, Carol, but the reality is the music industry has famously treated women terribly.
Yeah.
You know, the way they've been treated with recordings, actually the abuse they've received, royalties, you know, history is
like
littered.
Adele and the multi-millions that she earns.
Well, maybe not Adele, but I'm thinking further back, you know, like the Supremes, and I don't know, there's just so many people that were treated badly by the industry.
Taylor Swift would say she was one of those people.
And actually, one of the people that's been nominated this year, Ray, would say the same thing. She's written a song about being sexually abused by a producer, which is now on her first album and is doing brilliantly. So, but, you know, it was so obvious to me that that was going to fail, and it did. But the other thing that's happened now, which is really weird, is traditionally there were 6 nominees in this category, and they've extended it to 10, so it could be 5 women potentially and 5 men. Why didn't you just leave it at, like...
Men and
that?
women categories, it's just crazy.
Exactly. Just, you know, adding this number on doesn't do
Well,
the
it was
job.
all... Was it all because of that Sam
Sam
Smith?
Smith.
It wasn't the story
Who's
who
gender
said...
fluid.
He said, he said, I'm
Is
not
he
a man
he?
or a woman.
Can you call him
think.
he?
But I don't know
Is
what
he
you
he?
call him.
I don't know.
He's a they.
I think
He's a
they.
they.
He was born male.
But wasn't it...
Well, he still is male.
Wasn't the story... that's another argument altogether. Wasn't the story that they wanted the categories man and woman got rid of, so they had the one category, and it was 5 men in that category and no women at all. So this is... So, you know, it's exactly what you say, be careful what you wish for, because that's what you get. And just leave... Some things don't need to be tampered with. You know, you can have your views on gender, and you can have your views on what you think a trans woman is and all the rest of it, but when you're talking about something like music, 2 very distinct categories, and just leave them
Because we could go down this route with the Oscars and the
Emmys, you know, best performer as opposed to best actor and
But the reality is,
actress.
until we've sorted out sexism, fundamental sexism, it will never work as a system.
You see, Nikki, let's talk about the Oscar nominations this week, about Barbie. You know, apparently Ryan Gosling's furious because Margot didn't get the Barbie.
I don't think
didn't
he's that
get the
furious.
nominations. Why? When in what other movie does the male lead and the female lead both get Oscar nominations? They don't. And why should that director, the female director, why should she get a nomination if she's not the best?
Yeah.
They were always saying it's sexism, she's a woman. No, she hasn't got it. No, it's because people at the Oscars committee thought there were better directors.
Well, and Malone, I would say this, if there hadn't been a Hollywood strike, don't think that stupid film would have been nominated for an Oscar.
I know what the film's about.
Because it's just not very good.
But I've got to be honest, I haven't watched it. I've heard lots about it. I mean, it's interesting that it has made so much money. You know, it's like, you know, it's made ridiculous amounts of money.
Yeah.
I guess that's its own kind of reward, isn't it, if you're filmmaking?
Well, good. I'm glad it's made lots of money.
So obviously people
Good for the
like it,
cinema.
but people, you know, everyday people liking it is not the same as critics.
As in being the best film, and it doesn't have to be. You know?
Right. Should we talk about Rishi Sunak being under pressure, Carol?
Yes.
So this week, I think it was Monday, it's been a long week, hasn't it? MP Simon Clarke came out and wrote his letter and said he shouldn't be Prime Minister, our Rishi Sunak, and then what happened?
Nothing.
What happened was there's been an almighty uproar. But the thing is, when I first heard him say there should be another leadership election, I thought, oh, my God, the man is nuts, he's gone crazy. But then I drilled down into what he actually said, and I read the whole thing, and I thought, you know what, he's not wrong. He's just saying, we're going to sleepwalk, the Tories, he said, we're going to sleepwalk into oblivion, electoral oblivion. And he said, far better we have one last crazy throw of the dice and get a new leader in, because if we keep Sunak, Tories are losing, whatever happens. And I thought, yeah, you're right.
But who's the leader?
Well, it's got to be Boris, hasn't it?
He hasn't got a seat.
Cameron.
But he can get one.
There's no such thing as a safe Tory seat.
Would David
anymore.
Cameron be allowed to stay?
Well, David Cameron could give up his peerage, but we don't want Cameron back.
No, we don't want Cameron back, but we do want someone who, you know, he took the biggest victory in decades, and you know, Sunak has not connected to the people at all. And one of the things that he said that, you know, Sunak has, you know, he's accepted the anti-democratic interpretation of international laws. And that means that he's never going to defy the ECHR. He's never going to stop the boats. He can't do it because it requires us to ignore the ECHR. He's never going to do that. He hasn't connected with the British people in the way that Boris did.
And the other thing about him is that he should be in Silicon Valley. That's what he's good at. That's what he's designed for.
Well, that's where he's going to go after the elections.
Exactly. That's the kind of operator he is. He cannot. Completely what Carol's saying. He doesn't connect to the British people at all.
He's not listening.
But what about?
He's not listening.
It's a bit of a problem for Carol's solution, because Boris would have to win a seat.
Right.
I don't think it's going to be very easy for any Tory to win a constituency. No, you've got to.
Can't he move aside?
No,
can't someone move aside?
He's have to be elected.
And he's going to be busy.
I was going to say, the bigger problem is meant to be here.
Yeah.
He's already got a job.
Yeah.
Although we haven't seen him.
Where is he? But what do you think? What do you think the reaction would be from Labour if this new leadership contest was triggered?
Well, it'd be great if they did have a really solid candidate that was already in a seat, probably a safe seat, that people have been talking about, there was energy about them being the next leader. Fine, that would work. But this will just play right into Labour's hands. And actually, I think a lot of the public will say, are you kidding me? Another leader? You can't get your house in order. We're not voting for you.
Yeah, but you see, what Clarke said was you could actually get the contest done and dusted within a week. And the thing that he was emboldened by this poll this week, that the YouGov poll that said that people still want the Tories, they just don't want them the way they are. So this poll said that voters in 322 constituencies in England world said they'd prefer the Tories with a new leader to Keir Starmer. So that means get rid of Sunak and get someone in there who can do it.
It's also a terrible indictment, isn't it, Nick, on Keir Starmer, who has not cut through either.
No,
and he's had 4 years to do it. We don't know what he believes in. He changes his policies all the time.
He hasn't got it.
Boring.
He hasn't got it. He hasn't got the charisma. There's so many better people in the Labour Party you could put in for leaders. Many more people that I would vote for, including a lot of good women. But the other thing that's going to be interesting about this is the arrival of what they call the popcons on the 6th of February, this kind of splinter group within the Tory party that have said they don't know what they're doing, we're the kind of populist side of it, we do know what the people want, get on board with us.
You mean like the new Conservative team with the Miriam Cates crowd and Danny Kruger? Well, maybe. But so talking of politicians with other people waiting in the wings, we've all been looking baffled at Biden, haven't we, and thinking, how can he be the Democratic candidate in the next election in America? It is not possible that he's clinging on to his cognitive faculties, isn't he?
Barely.
There's been this rumour about Michelle Obama, which seems to have gained a huge amount of traction in the last 24 hours, Carol, that she's waiting in the wings and she's going to be parachuted in the spring. What do you make of it? How would she do?
If Trump gets the nomination, I think she will be parachuted in, because someone like Michelle Obama would not want Trump to be leader again.
She's having sleepless nights over it.
Yes, she will do. And you know, her little section, the liberal elite in America, will not want Trump in again. Although, very interesting piece by Boris the other week saying that Trump would actually be good for
Yeah, and he said, and better for national security.
I think so, because he's so unpredictable. You know, Putin is not going to mess with him. He's not going to say, I'm going to bomb you because Trump was out bomb you.
We've got very little time, Nikki. Would you vote for Michelle Obama?
Absolutely. I hope she becomes the
But
candidate.
it's a dynasty.
I can't vote. I'm not American.
But it's like dynasty. Another Clinton, Clinton's
But
wife.
she knows the business. That's why I'd
Obama's
vote
wife.
for her. She knows the ins and outs of the White House.
Right.
But that is precisely why I wouldn't vote for her, because I think she's part of the White House. Right, Carol, Nikki, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Thank you all for watching us all week, not just today. Up next, it is Tom and Emily with Good Afternoon Britain. What have you got coming up on the show? We'll see you Monday.
We'll be bringing you all of the details of the Nottingham killer sentencing. Precisely what will he be sentenced to, and will he be getting time off for claimed mental health issues?
And could Tom Harwood defend this country if we were to go into war? Sorry, I mean Gen Z. Could Gen Z defend this country come a war, if and when? Are they too woke for war, or could they step up? Could the younger generation step up at a time of need?
We'll be having a big debate on that, and also the crisis facing Rishi Sunak. Has he really only got 6 months to prove himself?
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. The storms have gone. Doesn't mean it's fine and sunny out there today, though. A lot of cloud around, some rain, but it is pretty mild. That's because we've got these weather fronts moving across the country, and in here, between these two weather fronts, some pretty warm air. But it is cloudy air as well, and it's a fairly grey afternoon. Some brightness possible over parts of eastern England. It may brighten up at times across the north of Northern Ireland and the west coast of Scotland. But for most, it's fairly dull. Outbreaks of rain working north across Scotland, and then some heavier rain coming into parts of northwest England and North Wales for a time. A bit damp elsewhere, but it is mild. Temperatures in double digits, maybe up to 13 Celsius if it brightens up over parts of eastern England. Through this evening and overnight, we'll keep further outbreaks of rain and drizzle over northern England, Northern Ireland and Wales, and then some heavier rain comes in across Scotland for a time. That band will work its way across most areas through the night. Behind it turns a bit colder. Could be some snow showers across northern Scotland, mostly over hills. Could turn icy here as well as temperatures tumble. For most, though, temperatures will hold up in the low single digits. Could be a wet start across East Anglia, but the rain quickly zooms away here. And actually for most, tomorrow's a dry, bright, fine day. A bit breezy in places, and there will be more showers coming into Scotland with some further snow over the hills. But for most, as I said, it's dry and bright. On Friday, we'll see some sunny spells, a cooler, fresher feel, and temperatures about average for the end of January.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality.